underscore 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 underscore. Hunger Games Year 73, June. Felix steadily made his exit from the train terminal. He turned back to his mentor, Raoul, and asked, "What do I do now?" Raoul's face reflected very little and he only said in return, "You meet your public." And his public he did meet. Not in his wildest imaginings could he have foresaw the crowd before him now. He found it rather daunting. "Are they always like this?" he asked Raoul. Mina Carroll stood behind him, enjoying a capital confectionery. She was rather blessed and continued to enjoy her lollipop, only offering, "It's been 10 years. Longest span in district history." The impossibly large crowd boomed with excitement. He levied a breath of relief. Home. He was finally among his kind, and no more stones would be thrown. No more crucifixions to endure. He was home, and there they were. Felicie, his sister called, her dark hair primly styled for this moment. "Jade," he called back in return, and met her halfway through the crowd. When they finally came together, she took him into her arms. She looked up from their embrace only a few seconds after and frowned, smoothing down some of his wayward locks with the pad of her thumb. "Honestly, Felix," she chided. He laughed. Eventually, they were loaded into an automobile to be taken directly to Victor's village, located in a small region entitled Golden Valley. They drove through desert wasteland for about 30 minutes before reaching an ornate gate. As the driver neared the entrance, the gate expanded in opposing directions and allowed them in. Felix watched as they slowly passed 4 houses to his right. On the opposite side of the street were another 4 homes. From the passenger window, he could discern each home was fascinatingly unique, but it was hard to better speculate as each home's entrance had a gate preventing him from getting a better view from his position in the car. "This is spectacular," he said, surprised by the array. The driver spoke for the first time and said, "This is phase I of Victor's village. On a separate street behind this, is an additional set of homes. Your home originally belonged to the first Quell Victor, but he died last year," Felix said, hanging on to the driver's every word. "Yes," the driver said. "Soren Lissany, I lived here." Jade asked, "That's a great omen." "It is," Felix agreed. "What an honor." The driver came to a stop. "Your home is here to the right, sir," his driver remarked, and exited his door, to open their own. Felix was still distracted by the sight before him. "You can call me Felix," he remarked, inattentively. He then asked, "Do you drive other Victors, too?" "Those who don't drive themselves, perhaps a few." Felix debated whether or not to ask, before gathering the courage. "So, do you know who lives beside me?" "On your right, is of course, Mr. Holland, of the 52 ND. Jade squirmed uncomfortably at that revelation, causing Felix to laugh to himself. "It's okay, Jade. I won't let him hurt you. It's just juvenile superstition." "Not me," Jade remarked, irately. She gestured towards the tanned 4-year-old girl asleep beside her in the back seat. "I won't let him hurt Roxanne either," course Felix clarified. "Come on now." Jade nodded faintly and roused Roxanne from her sleep. Roxanne exited the car in an uncoordinated motion and looked at the gate before them. "Where are we, Fessai?" "It's our new home," he replied. The small family, Felix in the center, his older sister to his left, and his niece curiously to his right, trailed towards the gate. It had a pin pad in place at the top of the layered rock beams. "You'll program the gate with a 5-letter passcode. This code provides your home additional security from scavengers," the driver remarked, returning to his car door. "Thank you, sir," Felix replied, and looked to the pin pad. In a few seconds' time he knew the perfect passcode and programmed the code into the pad. Once this procedure was complete, the gate to his new home opened for them, unfolding the grandiosity that lied beyond. The driver turned on the engine and quickly remaneuvered the car to make a polite exit from Victor's village. "I never could have imagined," Jade began, looking at their new home with awe-inspiring astonishment. "Are they all this big?" "Who needs a home so big?" "Victors who want to celebrate, I guess," Felix said, equally as stunned. His sister gave him a pointed look and he had the dignity to flush a little. Last thing on my mind right now, I promise. They stood, unnerved, and continued to gaze at the Santa Fe-style kingdom before them. Not too far in the distance was a fountain covered in dramatic shrubbery. You can give notice to the quarry on Monday, Felix remarked rather seriously, breaking from his stupor. Jade looked to him with great concern. She rubbed his back reassuringly. I will. Good, he mumbled, less tense than before. He gingerly picked up his niece and pressed a kiss to her forehead. We have all the money in the world now, Ro. All the money in the world, she asked, confused. So, what do you want? Whatever it is, it's yours, Felix said, looking to her, and he felt like for the first time he was really seeing her. Sure, he wasn't particularly fond of children, but Roxanne was part of his sister, and part of his parents, and all things considered, he did find her more endearing than most. I want to go to the park and play, Fessai. That took him aback, so he gave a moment for her to correct herself. What else? She looked around, and we can play hide and seek. Okay, Felix managed, still unsure why she wouldn't just tell him what she wanted. Oh well, she'd figure it out later. Finally, he swallowed his disillusion and smiled. Yeah, we can do that, promise. I love you. I love you, too, Fessai, Roxanne said rather easily. And you, he asked Jade, turning his attention back to her. You know I do, Jade said, concern lining her expression. No, he corrected, shuffling awkwardly. What do you want? This is what I want, she said, gesturing to the way he held Roxanne, and she put a gentle hand on her daughter's back. And that's it, he asked, disbelievingly. And maybe some new clothes, she teased. Okay, Felix agreed casually enough. He looked up at the front door. We're here. Do we go inside now? Roxanne asked. Yeah, you ready? He asked them. Ready, Jade said with a smile on her face as they turned the key and walked into their new life. Underscore 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 underscore. Hunger Games Year 73, July. A good effort there, Elroy. Couldn't have done it better myself. Considering you don't use a sword, I think that's a moot point, Fox. Kato muttered, annoyed. I could learn, Adi said offhandedly. He didn't bother looking at her when he informed her it'd be a waste of time, because I won't be sharing. Not even with your district partner, she asked, coyly. If you even have to ask, you don't belong here. She smirked at him. What's gotten you all rallied up? Hot stuff. She leaned against the wall, a spear gliding loosely in her right hand. Fox, there's a reason why no one will fuck you. You pretty much destroyed all your sex appeal when you decided to spear a guy in the balls right in front of the whole cohort. Adi's response was laced with amusement. Pretty unforgettable, wasn't it? You traumatized 58 boys in a single shot. It tops the list of images I see in my most fucked up nightmares. The brunette arched a brow and grabbed a black marker from the mobile whiteboard. I don't know how the girls resist you. Kato snorted, haughtily, you must not pay attention. I pay enough attention to know you're a virgin, hot stuff, Adi teased, her crocodile smile widening by the second as he looked at her with dismay. You're surprised, I know. Oh, honey, most do. Kato looked toward her aggressively. She inched up to him, flirtatiously, and laid a dainty, calloused finger on his bare chest. Has anyone ever told you that you're pretty miserable at strategy? Snapping out of his daze, he grabbed her wrist, making sure he was firm enough to keep her in his grasp, but careful enough not to injure her. Smirking, she loosened his grip on her wrist and gave him an admonishing look. You are way too easy to play, Elroy, she chastised. You need to get comfortable with physicality of intimacy, or you're always going to be an easy target. I took a gamble and it panned big rewards. For a good 10 seconds, you became so involved with what I was saying, that you didn't pay attention to what I was doing. Adi's eyes trailed to his hands and then his chest. Each area had been marked with a black X. What's all this? He asked, disgruntled with his failure. Areas where I could have speared you in the 10 seconds you were distracted. Kato followed her to the whiteboard, where she replaced the marker, and pulled an anatomy text out of her school bag. there's a reason why anatomy is usually taught in last year. The schools want their candidates well versed in the lethal and non-lethal areas of the human body. You're not a last year, Fox. Nero is the youngest senior in the cohort and you test after him. She nodded. Good, you're observant. Use that to your advantage. I happen to have borrowed this text from Mr. Highland. He can be an amicable man when persuaded. You'd do that just for a textbook? Cato asked, failing to hide his disgust. Adi released a contemptuous sigh, and I'd just gotten done calling you observant. No Cato, I didn't fuck the science teacher for a textbook. Cato watched her continue her tirade. As you noted earlier, I've permanently warded off the advances of the boys in our cohort. Not without reason, of course. What happens, Elroy, when a girl turns 12? He stared at her blankly. Exasperated, Adi huffed, the things boys don't have to think about. We become fair play. Anyone can snatch the tiniest little thing and have their way with them. Sexual consent laws end at 12. The blonde's mind strayed unwillingly to Magnilda, the thought of anyone doing so to her making him sick with fury. I wasn't about to let one of you mediocre fuckers try to bed me and leave me torn in some back alley. It's like you said, I destroyed all of my sexual appeal within the cohort. But not in the capital's eyes, and that's where it's really going to count. Could have saved yourself the effort, Fox. It's against Annex rules to force someone into sex. If someone wants something, they're not going to let an arbitrary rule stop them. Don't be so naive, she admonished. He crossed his arms, and you were so concerned that someone was going to want to have sex with you that you took it out on a dying man. Well, I had the choice to either spear one man to balls, or spear the whole lot when they came after me. This route seemed more cost-effective. You almost sound like Felix, he spat accusingly. She grinned at his non-approval. And do you know why Gray won? Because he was the last one standing, Cato answered, looking at her strangely. That's only a slice of the whole equation, Cato. Did you watch his first interview? Adi asked. Cato nodded in response. He spent 2 minutes and 47 seconds of his 4-minute interview talking about the Capitol. About how much he loved their architecture, about how he was excited to be there, about the different weapons they had in the training center, about his favorite past arenas. He became their ideal victor, physically capable, smart, attractive, and loyal to his last breath. Cato scoffed, Felix's loyalty is only to himself. Don't waste your breath. You haven't been paying much attention all these years, have you? Loyalty to the Capitol is the deepest form of loyalty to yourself. You cater to the Capitol and they'll cater to you. There's more to the games than capability to kill, Cato. And if you keep talking, I won't even be able to manage that. Back to work, Fox. Back to work, Elroy Adi agreed, and returned to her spear. Underscore 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 underscore. Hunger Games Year 73, July. A knock at the door drew Felix downstairs. He looked down at his black and white baseball tee and sighed, before making his way towards the front door. Oh, Raoul. So you are alive, his mentor greeted, cheerfully. I wasn't sure. Come in, Felix said, once he caught himself. Raoul came in and he closed the door, following up with, how are you, sir? Felix, we talked about this. Yeah, I know, Felix remarked, unconvinced. But, I still think you have to draw that line of respect. You're my mentor, not my friend. Oh, I'm not your friend, Felicity. Raoul asked, in derisive coyness. I should have never let you in a room with Jade, Felix said. With all due respect, you know. I don't worry about the caliber of your respect, kid. I'm sure others have had to in the past, but you've done a pretty good job of scrubbing the ego, I think. So, how can I help you, then? You haven't come to meet your public yet. I don't go on tour for another several months, Felix replied, confused. You haven't introduced yourself to any of your fellow victors. Makes you appear standoffish, or reclusive, which is worse. You're only given so much time to grieve before it's crippling to your reputation out here. What's there to grieve? Felix asked, still struggling to follow Raoul's tangent. I just didn't want to bother them. I figured they saw me live during the games, so if there was anything else to be said that they'd come find me. Can I give you a piece of advice? Always, Felix remarked, genuinely. It's great you were able to scrub the arrogance before going into the games, but you didn't have to wipe your whole personality clean. You're gonna need it out here. Have you considered this is just how I am? Raoul barked out a laugh. I wasn't born yesterday. At Felix's puzzled expression, he added. I used to be like you, kid. Well, you know, except not an asshole. You sure about that? Felix asked, cocking up an eyebrow. Raoul grinned, teasing him. Ah, there you are. Good. I'm not really following, sir, he said, and Raoul continued to grin at the way he struggled to remain dignified in a rather undignified exchange. I meant that when I won, I used to be like you. Shy, wouldn't say a word, was way too nervous, I'd fuck it all up if I did. Yeah? Felix asked, warily, desperately grasping for something to take hold of. So, what changed? Oh, I was never gonna survive that way. Not with my mentor. Which is who? Raoul grabbed his wrist carefully. We'll make him first stop on your toe. I was kind of in the middle of something. Raoul looked him up and down, scrutinizing his attire. What's with the mess? He asked, gesturing to the speckles of green paint dotting Felix's shirt and the splotches of dried green paint on his forearm. I was painting my niece's room. Why? I wanted to make it more kid-friendly. Antiquity isn't as quaint to 4-year-olds, so I thought I'd spruce it up for her. Aren't you the best uncle ever? Raoul teased. I'm trying to be, Felix said, honestly. Raoul smiled at him. Can I see it? Felix nodded his reluctant assent and took him upstairs to the room. 2 of the 4 walls had been coated in Kelly green paint that was still drying. Wow, Raoul said. That's really fucking bright. You don't like it? You do? Raoul asked. At Felix's frown, he added, but it's not for me. It's for a kid, so I suppose it'll do. Green is supposed to be a calming color. I don't think they meant quite this color. Well, since you've already come to fuck up the mood, might as well let me get changed so you can show me off, Felix said in mostly facetious resentment. That's the spirit, he laughed. Felix let out a chuckle and traveled the whole way towards the room he had claimed for himself. He pulled on an aquamarine tank top from the cherrywood dresser and rejoined Raoul downstairs. Raoul was a man in his early 30s. He and Felix shared the same olive skin, though he kept his black hair shorter than Felix, and his eyes were a less severe shade of brown. He was one of the very few people Felix had ever met who looked like him. Raoul led Felix down the pavement towards the home on his right. He entered in the 5-letter passcode into the pin pad and the gates opened to a home constructed with a log cabin lower exterior, with a stone covering from the middle up. Raoul knocked on the front door. Within a few seconds, Brutus Clark unlocked the door. He was a heavily muscled, light-skinned man with blue eyes and a shaved head. In Felix's ruminations, he would have believed him taller than he was, which was only 4 or 5 inches over him. So, you dragged the kid out of hiding. Figures. Wanted to make sure he met the rest of them before they conceived their own understanding of him by omission. Rather generous, aren't I? Raoul asked Brutus, his smile quite self-effacing. Rather self-indulgent, really, you show off, Brutus remarked. But it isn't a bad strategy. Felix, this is Brutus Clark, Raoul said to him, and then turned to Brutus. Sir, this is Felix Gray, the baby of Victor's village. Nice to meet you, sir, Felix said, nervously extending his hand. Brutus shook his hand and looked at Raoul suspiciously. You brought back a clone, he accused. As he led them to his dining room, he turned back to Felix. Brutus is fine. Jealous? Raoul asked, congenially. Better your clone than mine, Brutus said, with a lazy shrug. It'll rub off sooner or later, Raoul remarked, still impossibly cheery. You'll see in time he's just as much fun as I am. Hopefully with less tears. Hopefully, Raoul beamed. It really is an honor to meet you, Sir, Felix remarked. You're my friend's favorite Victor, actually. Not as much as an honor as it will be to meet in Oberia. Yeah. Raoul said. Barry's great. So, how does the mentorship system work? Felix asked. Beats me. He's the only one I got, Brutus said, jokingly hitting Raoul upside the head with an open palm. He cooks me breakfast most days. Pretty sure that's a rule in the secret handbook somewhere. And you're the only one I got, Raoul replied to Felix, before smiling sunnily to Brutus at his teasing. We mostly just take care of each other, sorta. Hard to say. Everyone has their own gimmick. Some are close, some aren't. Felix didn't think for a minute Raoul was going to give him a choice in that matter. This stretch was real bad. I saw 3 of my own tributes die, Raoul said, seriously. But here you are, Felix. What difference does it make, though? Felix asked, and then upon realizing that could be taken the wrong way, added, not that I'm ungrateful. Makes a big difference, actually. This was our longest dry spell since before the first quell, Brutus replied. Could have some pretty life-rippling effects for you, actually, kid. So you might want to prepare for that. Like what? Girls dropping to their knees. Raoul began to laugh. Brutus. What, was that in bad taste? You got a girl back home? I don't, but that's a pretty moot point since my sister and my niece are moving into Victor's village with me. Never took a Westerner for holding on to their virtue, Brutus replied. Huh. I don't think that's what he said, Raoul remarked, shaking his head. Anyways, we better be off. I just wanted Felix to meet you first, since you're the best we have. Yeah, Brutus smirked, pushing Raoul off. Still a suck-up after almost 15 years, Lito. You doubt even to this day? Raoul asked, feigning hurt. No, of course not, Brutus mocked, shoving Raoul out the front door. He turned to Felix. Good to meet you, kid. See you around. You as well, sir. Once they were outside of Brutus' home and walking towards his secured gate, Felix managed to ask, what did he mean when he said he hoped I came with less tears? I came with a lot of baggage, that's all. How come? Because before the games I had never killed a child before. That stopped Felix in his tracks. What? He asked. You ever been to 2 South? Raoul began, continuing to walk. Felix shook his head and followed him with great reservations. It's a real rural community. Out there we train more informally. It's more physically rooted, more in the earth, less focused on gimmicks and advanced maneuvers, and out there we don't kill. Felix stopped, pulling Raoul by the arm, and looking to him with a fiery curiosity. What's your count, Raoul? Felix. Tell me, Felix demanded. 9. 9, Felix reflected back with stunned disbelief. You have to understand, Felix. I wasn't doing this for the reasons most do. What does that even mean? I wanted to be an angel of mercy. 23 kids have to die each year, but it doesn't mean 23 kids have to suffer each year. But you're the Grim Reaper, Victor. Felix responded with dismay, recalling with limited memory what he could about the 59th games. All he could see was the image of a teenaged Raoul in a black tribute coat with a hood that hung over his head, holding his scythe with great deliberation. Yeah, how about that? Raoul replied with a bitter smile. They said I was ruthlessly expedient in how I eliminated the other tributes. Just shows it doesn't matter what you do. They're always going to contrive a narrative that fixes us as the antagonist. It's much more demoralizing to the outlines if they go into each year with death assured. So, let me get this clear, you trained for over a decade so that you could bring mercy to kids in slum districts. Well, not quite in that order. I think I came to that part later. If someone is going to win the games, Felix, it should be District 2. We work harder than anyone else. If everyone else has to die for that to happen, it doesn't mean they have to suffer. That sounds treasonous, Felix said, uncomfortably. No, Raoul corrected, looking directly at him with ardent passion. Listen to me. I recognize that the games have to exist. Every district has to have a stake in conformity. If the outlines think losing 2 kids a year is agonizing, imagine the cost another war could provoke. I wasn't challenging the function of the games, just the method of delivery. If we know 23 kids will die each year and this is our burden to bear, then the least we can do is allow the kids to understand that it's not their fault, that it's a penance they bear from their ancestors, and to give them peace in their sacrifice. Okay, Felix said slowly. Okay. Does that make me a less worthy mentor in your eyes? Felix shook his head, but refused to meet his eyes. No, I guess not. Then what's wrong, Felix? Raoul asked. I wanted people to suffer. I never even considered an alternative. Hey, Raoul said, gently, tipping up Felix's head. You and I come from completely different places. You did what you had to survive and I'll always be grateful you did. A count of 9. I can't even imagine. I had more than 20 to my name by 15. Don't do that, Raoul said, fiercely. If you have a count of 5, fucking fantastic. If you have a count of 500, even better. I didn't tell you to fuel an identity crisis. I just wanted you to understand that no two victors are alike and no two recovery process is the same. Okay, Felix said coarsely. You're alive, Felix. Which means no matter what you do, I'm always going to be in your corner. That's a dangerous thing to say, Raoul. These are dangerous games we play, Felix. Raoul agreed. He took Felix into his arms. Hey, look, I would have never imagined that I'd get a victor like you, but I'm glad. It means you can continue stripping away the pretense and become the best version of yourself. If you knew the things I've done in my life you wouldn't think so. Ever raped someone? Felix recoiled from Raoul's grasp and looked up at him, frowning. It's against the rules to force someone into sex at the annex. I recognize that that's a no, Felix, but fuck if that isn't a terrible way to frame your response. It makes it sound like you would have if there hadn't been a rule in place. No, of course not, Felix remarked defensively. My friend Clove says there are worse things than rape, that death is worse. Has your friend ever actually been raped? Raoul asked him. I don't know. I don't think so, Felix said, confused. Raoul watched him warily. Well, here's a fast rule, kid. District 2 may feel like a lawless land, but you're a role model now. That means whichever guy or girl you bring home, you're going to make sure they have their wits about them. Folks really like to fling themselves at victors, and Brutus is right, you're probably going to be propositioned quite a bit considering how exciting your win is for District 2. All right, Felix agreed, easily enough. Then he more aptly digested Raoul's words, and asked, wait, did you say, guy or girl? You have to make sure the guys consent, too. It's not just for when you're with girls, Felix. Raoul started laughing at the look of confused discomfort on his victor's face. Why did you think you ended up the baby brother tribute, Felix? I was trying to find a non-creepy way to explain the unyielding adoration in your sweet little eyes, Raoul remarked. He then added, honestly, I don't know why the game makers only focused on Mariana. A manager choice storyline would have been much more interesting. A manager what? Felix asked, staring him down with severe confusion. I keep forgetting you're a 16-year-old kid from the desert, Raoul said. What I meant was that it would have been more interesting for the capital audience to watch the paramour dynamic between you, Mariana, and Silk, rather than just you and her, you know. Raises the stakes and all. Kinda a lost opportunity for them. Better luck next time, I guess. Can we talk about something else, please? You can go back to questioning my taste in paint colors. Anything to end this line of discussion. Raoul teased, his eyes smiling at Felix's awkwardness. Dre Holland's house is next. Underscore 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 underscore. Hunger Games Year 73. The first time Felix Gray returned home to District 2 West had been for an article being authored about him and his history for a District 2 luxury magazine. It had been quite a bit of pomp and circumstance. Cato and Nero had ended up in the background of several photos meant to solely focus on him. He'd hand-waved the photographer's frustration away, informing him that if he expected to get any shots without other students featured somewhere amongst a crowd that he'd be better off taking the photographs in a restroom. His writer had been horrified at the thought. All in all, it was an effective piece of propaganda. The second time he had returned home to District 2 West had been shortly after meeting the president. While a rather peculiar engagement, the president had made allusions to his sex life. Maybe Raoul had been right. Maybe he hadn't been as subtle as he would have been well-to-do, it had been pleasant enough. The president had even indulged him in taking a photo. Felix had been prepared to shove it in Clove's face. But before he'd gotten the opportunity, his sister's old home, the one in which she had just prepared for sale, had been engulfed in flames. Felix had ran to the quarry, round to get her, when they'd broken the news that she'd resigned the previous day. He fell to his knees, crippled by the sheer agony, as he realized his sister was inside the home. Then the president's conversation didn't seem so peculiar. He vomited at the realization, then he curled up in shock. The third time he returned to District 2 West, he was in a suit and tie. His sister and niece memorialized for their rather brief lives. Nero and Nurse Ebony had tried to keep him together, but he stood there, a vacant expression on his face, knowing it was all his fault. A few of his sister's acquaintances had come. His uncle even showed up, intoxicated, and unhelpful. Felix had considered tripping the man into the open plot and leaving him for dead. Roxanne's father had managed to show up for the first time in nearly 5 years. Felix had wondered if there were room in the plot for his body, too. Jade Grey had been 23 the day she died. Roxanne hadn't even made it to 5. At least her father had the dignity to muster up some grief for the daughter he never held. It was too little too late. Once the arrangements concluded, Felix didn't return home for another 6 months. It's not like the capital gave him much opportunity anyway. Underscore 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 underscore. Cato hacked the dummy to pieces. With their first victor in 10 years, the Annex had finally been able to afford newer supplies, and with Cato as their candidate, they had desperately needed them. He turned to Clove, who sat in the corner, working on an outline of the 40-second Hunger Games. Moving to another dummy, he asked, "If I asked you to define our relationship, what would you call us?" She contemplated to herself, and then answered with a shrug. "We're Cato and Clove." "Cato and Clove, huh?" he asked, before slicing the head off another dummy. With the sweat gliding down his face and the fire in his eyes, he was just the right medicine for her every ailment. Her eyes widened when she realized what she was thinking and how ridiculous it sounded. Though, not as ridiculous as Cato's follow-up line. "So is that a heavy metal band from the capital, or the newest legal group, or?" She stuck out her tongue in response, and he flashed her $1 million grin. "You're in candidacy training and I'm not exactly short-scheduled either. You know how I feel about you and I know what you think about me. As I recall, you called me protective and well-intentioned. If that doesn't get my wheels turning, I don't know what would," he responded. She arched her eyebrows at his banter. "Someone has a selective memory. I called you stupidly protective, and prone to bad life choices despite being well-intentioned. You forgot to mention my forgiving temperament," he teased, stalking over to her and giving her a quick kiss. Cato withdrew from the kiss, and looked at the bemused Clove. "At least I said nice things about you." She touched his cheek with her thumb. The blonde melted into her touch and Clove smirked at him, lightly teasing, 10 more dummies and you get another kiss. "You really know how to motivate a guy, Clovey." Cato joked, returning to his sword with a boyish grin. She rolled her eyes, but was unable to suppress an amused smile. He made sure to commit it to his memory. Underscore 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 underscore. Hunger Games Year 73, December. "Do you remember when we first met?" "Bits and pieces." Felix peeked with a yawn, lifting up the heavy sheets and looking into the familiar face with a solemn sense of relief. Nero sat on the bed and draped the raven-haired teen's head over his legs. He received lackluster protest, but instructed his charge to relax, and quietly began. It was in the fall of '64. We were in 3rd grade and you'd been punished for talking back to your teacher, so they sent you to help the school nurse. And I came into her office with a bleeding scab and told her I'd cut myself while helping my mom cook dinner. When she left to get me a bandage, you locked her in the supply closet and demanded that I tell you what had actually happened. You tried to lie, but even then I could read you like a book. Yeah, you've always been a tricky little bastard, Nero said affectionately. My teacher wrote home, saying I'd been in cahoots with an instigator and that I'd ought to re-evaluate my decisions in life. My mom nearly lost her mind and told me if she ever caught me playing in my father's things ever again, she'd send me to my uncle. Nero continued to pet his hair and went on with the story. And the next day at the annex, you saw a kid making fun of me for spending all my class breaks reading strategy textbooks. You hit him pretty hard, actually, and told him, never underestimate your opponents. Felix finished, feeling the irony of that statement as well. But then you went and messed everything up by apologizing on my behalf. Nero nodded. You got so mad I really thought you were going to hit me next, but instead, to balance out my apology, you decided to call him every varied insult of short you could. And yet, he still became our friend. It took a while. Nero laughed. He got so upset off that he sauntered off to punch the next person he saw. Which just happened to be Kato. He castigated, lightly. Yeah, and Kato could not have had the stick any further up his ass either. For the entire first year of training, he didn't talk to anyone, but as soon as he got hit, he turned into a little devil. Nero formed a knowing expression, and the instructors told them to either put up or shut up and made them duel it out. Dicey beat the stuffing out of Kato and then turned around and helped him up with the biggest grin of his life. I never really thought of it much, but it's your fault, we're all friends. If you hadn't picked up your dad's axe all those years ago, none of this would have happened, Felix told him. Yeah, you could have ended up friends with Kyler Gunn. I'm not Dicey. I don't befriend my victims. The ash-haired boy nodded. Nope. You've always been a professional, Felix, he remarked lightly. I wish I'd been able to come around more, lately. Between final exams and the annex, all of my free time's been accounted for by your quarry whore, the black-haired teen snapped. Like you're one to talk about being a whore, he chastised himself. Nero sighed, but didn't stop running his hands through the soft black hair. I thought we had made progress on this. Felix turned away from him and Nero sighed, feeling worse. Felix got out of his bed and reached into a drawer, pulling on a red, long-sleeved t-shirt and a pair of denim jeans. He found that lately he felt more comfortable with at least 2 to 3 layers of clothing separating him from everyone else around him. Some would have called that neurotic. With Nero he could survive in a singular long-sleeve tee. Felix, Nero gasped out. Shit. You're tiny, too fucking tiny. Why aren't you eating? It's not like I need the muscle anymore, Felix said in return. He left Nero on his bed and headed to the kitchen. Nero followed him out a minute later and stood by as he took his 3rd glass of water. Why are you sleeping during the day again, Felix? Nero asked, gently. You'd been doing better last time I was here. Roxanne's 5th birthday would have been tomorrow, Felix barely managed in a whisper. I hated Jade for ruining our lives by getting pregnant, and I really hated Ro for being another mouth to feed when we had nothing to give. But of all the kids I've ever met, she really was the best we could have had. Nero pulled Felix into a supportive hug. I was really going to be a better uncle, he sobbed into Nero's shoulder. I thought I was safe to be a better person, whatever that meant. I've done fucking awful things, and it's all my fault. It was an accident, Felix. Nero broke in. You couldn't have known the wiring to the house would have malfunctioned like that. Felix lost his breath, the image of the inferno before him making him hyperventilate. He couldn't tell him. He couldn't tell Nero that it wasn't faulty wiring that caused their old home to catch fire. It would only put him more danger. Felix could barely restrain himself when he thought about what President Snow had said about Nero. How he wasn't first child of posthumous tribute to have been born, and that while it was true Felix no longer had any family left, it didn't mean he didn't have any liabilities left, and to consider that risk in denying the man a second time. He looked out the back window, solemnly. I leave tomorrow. Beginning at District 12 and then moving up. I'll be home by harvest day. Nero watched him cautiously. Be safe, Felix. Underscore 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 January, Hunger Games Year 74. Have you ever thought about how divided this school is? Dicey asked, holding his backpack on his left shoulder. He maneuvered through a growing crowd in the hallway and ducked an incoming herd of students. The building, manufactured entirely in brick, was old-fashioned and monotone, but every hallway had the school number printed on it, District 2, School #91. The redhead's smaller stature made it easier for him to move quickly, and he took full advantage of this while dodging the onslaught of students at every turn. The same couldn't be said for Cato, who stood at 6'2" and usually just pushed the other students out of his path if they took too long. What's the point of hanging around the normal kids? Normal good or normal bad? Dicey quipped, following the hallway that led towards their class. Just normal. They don't spend 45 hours a week learning a dozen different ways to kill people. Dicey shrugged lazily. I don't know. I think I'd rather kill someone than deal with speak of the she-devil. Dicey shot a wink to the graceful and supple brunette who was leaning against a locker. She only glowered at him in response. Cato gave the teen a bemused expression. Why do you feel the need to constantly provoke her? Because her mood swings are entirely unfair. Cato groaned, not bothering to hide his amusement. You're the one sleeping with typicals, Dice. What does she want anyways? A marriage proposal. Cato feigned a sympathetic expression. From you. You can barely scrounge up enough money for a piece of toast, let alone a diamond ring. Dicey shoved him in retaliation. Stop whining, princess. You should be glad any girl is interested in you to begin with. Maybe especially Ashley. They entered the classroom, sitting in the back and continuing their conversation. The auburn-haired teen sighed, burying his annoyance. We fuck around together a few dozen times and suddenly I'm a horrible person for not wanting to drop down on one knee. A couple days ago Longlegs told me she thought she was pregnant. What more can I do for you than what you can do for yourself? Before Tesseri we had to pickpocket and fist fight for money to get enough to eat. A few dozen times is practically a relationship for you, Cato quipped. At Dicey's glare, he added, just push her down the stairs. Thanks for the advice, Clove. Dicey mocked with a small smile. I don't plan on having any kids until I'm married and we're in better finances. I do want kids eventually. I just want to do it right. Is there a right way to have a kid? Cato asked. I don't know, Dice. Maybe it just depends on the person. At least when I was with Clove there weren't any complications to it. We'd toss and turn and go on with our lives. Cato didn't manage a response to that. Dicey pondered aloud, leaning back, considering how young we were and the girls I've had since. She wasn't bad. Maybe things would be easier if it were the two of us again. At least I know she can't get pregnant. Cato turned to him with a heated glare and smashed his companion's face with his right fist. The auburn-haired boy wiped away the blood and smirked, laughing uncontrollably. Now, that was totally worth it. What the hell are you so smug about? The auburn-haired teen grinned, carefree. I needed a laugh. Thanks, see. Tell me, you slick bastard, Cato growled lowly. Man, you're so fucked. It's kind of sweet, actually, Dicey said, smiling. Cato's glare didn't wane. What the hell does that mean? You better not be doing anything with Clove. I try not to repeat my mistakes, Dicey replied, breezily. Then why did you? For the look on your face, of course, Dicey said, punching Cato's shoulder lightly. He managed to actually look like he felt bad for the exchange. What? You and Chloe have been off doing your own thing for months and neither of you sociopaths managed to let me know, even though I'm both of your best friends. It wouldn't have taken much time out of your day to say, hey, Dicey, Clove and I are dating. Aren't we spectacular? What, did you think I'd be unsupportive? Kato gave him an exasperated expression. I could have killed you over that joke. Oh, you'd kill me over a girl? Dicey asked, now that wounds me. Shut up, Kato said, still exasperated. I might not have your academic discipline, but I'm not blind, Kato. And to you both, I say, about fucking time. I think it's great. We're not dating, alright? We're just Kato and Clove, the blonde urged him, thinking about what Clove would do if she found out Dicey knew. They'd explicitly kept it under wraps to avoid the countless jokes that would have inevitably resulted. Dicey rolled his eyes. So now I need a reintroduction. You're a pain in the ass, you know that, right? Kato complained, pulling out his calculus textbook and beginning a problem set. He ignored the funny faces Dicey began making, which included exaggerated smooching sounds and the heart shape formed by his hands. The auburn-haired teen snatched a few stray sheets out of the blonde's textbook, a 97, a 98, and a 94. You are impossible. If you'd actually do the work, you might pull yourself out of the dirt. Kato responded, not raising himself from his textbook. I literally don't have the time, Dicey lamented. He sighed, leaned forward, and placed his head into his arms. Kato continued his problem set. Is teaching so many privates really worth the effort? He asked, scribbling the next solution into his notebook. The alternative is Hallie selling herself to perverted old men, so yes. I don't want my 13-year-old sister getting herself into a predicament she can't get out of. Besides, if she got pregnant, we'd be financially fucked all over again. You could always go extort money from Felix, Kato remarked. I think he'd probably give it to you, too, seeing as he's yet to actually do anything with his winnings. Did you see his speech in 3 last night? He looked like a dead man walking. I'm beginning to think he won't make it through to alive. The blonde arched his brows, better than the ghostly mess he was in 10. He's taking a long damn time getting over his dead sister and her curtain climber. Dicey didn't look up from his arms, only murmuring, I didn't even know he had a niece. Thought she was his uncle's kid. It's pretty fucking convenient that he managed to extract so many personal details out of us over the years, but we never really knew anything about him, Kato replied. He's been thinking like a victor since day one. Underscore 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 underscore. February, Hunger Games Year 74. After 5 mind-numbing weeks, his tour was finally coming to a concise close. The single remaining district, his own, would be much less troublesome than the several prior. Felix had begun to question the outlying district's mindset. They'd mourn 2 dead teenagers but wouldn't work to repair their own economic conditions. He'd send 100 teenagers to the games if it meant the rest of the district would be fully able to care for its children. Utilitarianism, in a nutshell. In 11, the kids were as scrawny as they were abundant. 10 was breezy and uncomfortable. The 17-year-old boy hadn't ever been in a snowstorm, let alone the miserable blizzard that overtook them. Having come from the arid desert of District 2, he'd suffered greatly that evening. In District 8, the citizens' eyes feasted upon him and he had a few theories as to what they wanted. The clothes off his back. Maybe even the skin off his bones. He wondered if he'd killed one of their tributes. He couldn't remember. Everything that happened before his allies betrayed him was a blur, and even the deaths that followed were somewhat unclear in his recollection. He'd seen a brief recap in his victor's interview, but the scenes had been selectively edited together in a manner that told the story differently than how it had actually happened. They'd cast him as the big, bad wolf come to hunt the other tributes. The 3 trained girls were painted as brave heroines, making a great risk to send one home. They had conveniently omitted the scenes where he lied awake for countless hours, just waiting for a tribute to strike. They'd also forgotten the scenes where he'd cared less about glory and more about simply living. He'd wanted to live more than anything else. The outlying district's hasty judgments were unnecessary. He was quite proud of what he'd done, it was some of his best work, and it had entertained not only the capital, but consumers all throughout Panem. It'd be hypocritical to crucify him for only managing to survive. He'd only done what had been demanded of him. At least they had known their children were soon to die, were able to say their farewells, no matter how brief. He hadn't even been given that indulgence. The black-haired teen crafted a mental to-do list, lazily tacking on the materials his blue-haired escort, Mali, had suggested he purchase for his talent. His team had bargained hard over it after they'd mistakenly stepped into Rose's room and fallen into a fit of sentimental tears. They'd won. He'd chosen carpentry and architectural design over military leadership. In only a few days' time, he'd finally return home. Not to the exaggerated mansion or the burnt-down flat. No, he'd return to his real home, District 2 West's training annex. Underscore 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 underscore. February, Hunger Games Year 74. Good morning, she heard a light, cheerful voice ring out. The brunette turned to her bedroom door, but was surprised to find the door was still closed. Then where was the voice? She stifled a yawn, stretched her arms, and nestled deeper into the blankets. She had probably just imagined his voice. When he wasn't arrogant or mad, it was actually rather nice, sweet, even. What time is it? She asked herself, wrapped tight in her comforter. Clove didn't have to look to the calendar to know that today was. Cato paused, believing she had been speaking to him, and referenced her alarm clock from her desk, all while trying not to lose his balance. Clock says it's about 8. Clove turned and finally realized which direction Cato's voice had been coming from and that he wasn't an illusion her mind had suddenly conjured up. He was perched halfway between the outside of her window and the interior of her room. How the hell did you get through my window? She asked in disbelief. I borrowed your neighbor's ladder, he said, completely casually. Honestly, Cato, she yawned. Am I in trouble? He asked, rubbing his arm awkwardly. What are you doing here? Clove admonished from her spot in bed. Usually, she was up and moving quickly, but she wasn't feeling at her best and today was. He swung his other leg over the windowsill, taking her comments as permission to enter her room from the window. I'm here to help you, cuties. She didn't have to look at him to know he was smiling. Sometimes he was entirely too predictable. I'll train with you next Sunday, Cato. I'm here to help with your cold, he clarified, beaming cheerfully. You don't want to make out with me? I'm sick, Clove reminded him. There are literally no benefits to this for you. Clove coughed, turning away from him and snuggled up to her favorite knife and prepared herself to revisit the pleasantry of her dreams. She hoped he'd see his way out and allow her to rest. They earned 1 day off each week and each moment he remained was a second of peace she could never get back. Cato walked over to her, pulled the heavy duvet off her, and looked at her with a mixed expression of concern and inquiry. I'm here to cater to your every need. Just call me Dr. Cato. How about Doctor, get the hell out of my house so I can sleep, she replied with a glare. Cato smirked. I'm sticking around whether you want me to or not, babe. He pressed the back of his hand to her forehead and quickly rescinded it. You're definitely burning up, Clovey. How many days have you been sick? I don't know. When was the year 68 showcase? Clove Cato castigated, aghast. That was 4 days ago. In her hands, he was putty. Then again, the feelings were entirely mutual, so they were both in trouble on that end. Still, she couldn't help admit how glad she was that he had been the first person she saw. Especially today, even if he was being bothersome. Barely coherent enough for him to understand, she mumbled, "It's not like you being here is gonna make the fever go away any faster." The statement was logistically true, but he couldn't further explain his motives to Clove without an unwanted negative reaction. She would have probably scoffed at him, or pitied him, the latter being infinitely worse. How exactly would he explain that he had taken love advice from his dead brother's records book? That sounded pathetic for a regular person, but infinitely more so for him. Do you dare question my abilities? He asked innocently. With such a diverse range, from annoying Clove to making lame jokes that annoy Clove, how I could even dream to. I think we should break up. I wasn't aware we were dating. Cato sat against her window, levying a severe glare at the brunette. This hadn't been the response he'd been expecting, and surprise, she'd left him emotionally shortchanged once again. "You don't have to be like this all the time," he complained. "But I am like this all the time," she retorted. "Then whatever this is, I think we should stop. You obviously don't like me, so why are we even wasting our time?" The ill girl looked at him for a minute before turning away. "That's what I thought, Clove," he said, disdain in every single syllable. The blonde stood up, opened the window, and shot her one last glance, before climbing down the ladder and onto the gravel below him. When she was sure he was gone, Clove got up, shut the window with a slam, and returned to bed, cocooning herself protectively from the outside world. Today was her 16th birthday. Underscore 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 underscore. February, Hunger Games Year 74. Looking left towards the clock, Aniston sighed with reluctant relief. There were only 5 minutes left until Nero's short break between classes. The wavy-haired blonde leaned against a wall and pulled at her blouse distractedly, while clutching to her bag tightly. She made a slight movement, vacillating between exploring the building, or staying in place. Her decision was made for her when she heard a voice from behind her. "Did ya get lost, darling?" She took in a sharp breath and turned to the unwelcome, but unfortunately familiar face. Aniston put her biases to bed and said with a smile, "It's nice to see you home, Felix." He frowned, studying her with skeptical curiosity at the genuine note in her voice. "It's been so long since we've had a victor. The guys here could rip you to shreds. Shouldn't just walk the place without knowing where you're going, Angel," he cut her off, trying to shake off his confusion. Aniston's blue-green eyes clouded with worry and she asked, "I wasn't. But you thought about it." At her guilty expression, he added, "You remember Clove?" Nero's cousin, the fair-skinned girl, returned, thinking to the few times they'd been in the same vicinity since watching the games a few years back. "I like her. She's funny." "She's a hell of a lot more than just Nero's cousin," Felix corrected her, then changed beats, flirtatiously adding, "And if you're ever wondering what kind of person Nero can be, just remember he let us use her as a rag doll for 6 years before I found out." Aniston grew very uncomfortable as he came closer to her. Clove is 5'4" and about 120 pounds, a tiny little thing compared to even some of the other girls, and she's a beast. Now imagine what the guys who stand at 6 feet and double her weight can do. Aniston tucked a few of her wavy strands behind her right ear and spoke thoughtfully, "She wouldn't bother me, though. Not Clove. Clove is Nero's family. He cares for her." "That wasn't what I was trying to say, but it brings up a good point. H could kill Nero without a second thought. And just because he gets a guilty conscience here and there doesn't mean he was always caring." At that remark, Aniston looked troubled. Felix resisted the urge to tear every last strand out of her prim and proper little head, instead responding, "She wouldn't hurt him though. Has some fucked up family fetish." He rolled his eyes, "Treats her sister like a frail baby bird. That little number is lethal. She could enter the games today at 12 and probably slaughter a good 3/4 of the other tributes, and Clove still looms over her like a dark cloud." "I think it's sweet how much they care so much for each other," Aniston replied, off balance from his nearing proximity. "Don't be so naive," Felix spat, cruelly. He put his hands on her shoulders, hoping to shake the naivety from her frame. "I don't understand why you hate me. We both care about Nero. We're on the same team," and she began, suddenly desperately fearful at the weight of his hands on her shoulder. He released a contemptuous laugh and said smoothly, "We're nowhere near in the same league, Wagner. I've been his best friend for 10 years, and you're a lousy little fucktoy. You're only around as long as he wants your body, and then you'll be cleanly disposed of." She swallowed, and looked up defiantly into his brown eyes as he asked, "Did you see how I took care of District 4? Aniston's breathing increased erratically, and it was clear from her trembling that she had indeed seen the dark-haired teen's acts against the Spitfire from District 4. Good, she finally understood, then. When he prompted her further for an answer, she only quavered out a broken yes. And that's someone I liked. Now imagine what I could do to someone I don't, he said in the same suggestively lethal tone. Her stomach knotted several times over and she wondered why she had come to this place in the first place. It had always made her uncomfortable before, and now she was paralyzed in place. Forget the other students. Felix in this state was enough to detract her from the annex. Please? Do you doubt me? Not even for a second, she said quickly, honestly, avoiding his glance. He smirked cruelly, tipping up her chin. Good. You're smart. I like you. Felix, she whimpered. Aniston's eyes were full of tears, and with a menacing smile, he added, we're going to be very good friends. Underscore 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 underscore. February, Hunger Games Year 74. Clove stalked forward determinedly. Today, she would make things right. It had been 10 long days. 10 days too many. She was beginning to doubt if she could do this, but she smiled to herself, imagining his joyous expression, and that brightened her demeanor considerably. He needed to know how she felt, and today, she'd finally tell him without the jokes, filters, or redirects. She took a deep breath and cleared her mind before stalking up the 3 familiar faces. This embarrassment had already crippled her and she'd yet to say anything. Cato stood front and center, with Dicey to his left and Nero to his right. The auburn-haired teen grinned at her. Afternoon, Chloe. Normally, she would have given him a small smile or a gentle jab in return, but his comment had cut off her immediate thinking. Suddenly, all of her fear circulated into her stomach and she wanted to do nothing but run in the opposite direction as fast as she could. Looking up, she directed her eyes to Cato's and said resolutely, I need to talk to you. The oldest of the trio, Nero, made a movement to leave respectfully, but Cato pulled him back without breaking eye contact. Nero slapped his arm away from him. Anything you want to say, you can say in front of all of us. Clove looked at him with unease. Cato. Take it or leave it, he said, crossing his arms stubbornly. With a mixed expression of nervous bravery, she started quietly, unsure where to begin. The speech she had prepared had sounded better in her head and now she couldn't remember anything she'd wanted to say to him. So she hit him where it really hurt, his ego. When you entered tribute candidacy 2 years early, it was really unexpected. When Fix went into preemptive training, it was almost a natural presumption. He was the best student for over 5 years, without losing his place even once. But you had to really work for it. You went from #21 in year 68 to the top 10 by year 71, and by 73, you were so good they picked you to represent the entire region much earlier than we could have anticipated. Fascinating, Cato interrupted, bored. Dicey grimaced, uncomfortable to be in the middle of this. Clove changed her approach, this time being a bit more direct. Cato, look, you have this energy that just cannot be contained. In everything you do, you give it 100%. Everyone knows you're a good fighter. And no one doubts that, but they don't know just how brilliant you are. She flushed lightly. My, she bit her lip to stop herself from rambling. Heart, it always skips a beat when I catch you in the lounge reading a book or in the hallways, just teaching my sister the newest moveset, and I'm. Clove took a deep breath, now shaking, but resolve unwavering. It scares me how much I like you. That's why I keep you at arm's length, because I'm terrified that I'll fuck it up. I mean, I already did, but when I see you smile, I feel like anything is possible. When I'm around you, all my thoughts are irrational and you make me happy. You make me want to work harder. When you left, I realized just how much I need you. I hated myself for pushing you away, for being so stubborn. You were the first friend I ever had in my entire life and that means everything to me. You were probably the first person that I ever really cared about outside of my family and I do trust you. I trust you a lot, and... Dicey was glowing, the sincerest smile she'd ever seen on his face, and Nero was giving her an encouraging grin, and she knew she'd soon become the butt of some joke, but right now she didn't care. Hesitantly, she looked at the blonde's reaction. Kato stood impassively. "Say something," she pleaded quietly, adding, "please." He remained in place, unmoved. "There's not much to say." His response was steely and mechanical. "Right," she let out a disappointed breath, her heart sinking. "Right. Okay." Clove's posture slunk slightly, and she turned away from him, walking away as quickly as she could without outright running away. When she was out of sight, Dicey and Nero turned to him with matching horrified, bewildered expressions. "What the fuck was that?" Dicey demanded. "You know how hard that had to be for her," Nero added with a disgusted scoff. "Clove might be an asshole, but she really just gave you everything she could, and that's all you can manage in return. Mind your own fucking business. If you really cared about Clove, you would have stopped this before it started," he told Nero. Then he turned to Dicey, with less ire, "And you have no right to judge me from where you stand, so back off." Dicey's cheeks reddened with anger and he took several heavy breaths that did nothing to calm him down. Finally, he said, coolly, "I hope you think real hard about what you just did. Underscore 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 underscore. March, Hunger Games year 74. It had been a mistake to go through his brother's old record book. When he'd first snatched the book from the spot where he'd last hidden it, he had done so because he had so desperately needed someone to talk to. By its very nature, candidacy training was done in pairs, but it might as well have been done alone, because Adie Fox was a bitter and deeply troubled individual. Truly ruthless and brutal in her own manner, he didn't believe for a minute that she'd refrain from commentary. Recent developments had made him suspect she'd been touched as a small child. He was less cold to her once he came to that conclusion. It wasn't so much the physical presence of being alone that affected him. He had Dicey, Nero, even Felix had begun making semi-regular appearances. Instead, it was more so that he felt like he could no longer relate to anyone. The brunt of his training was done with Adie or on his own, and he'd sooner saw off his own hand before talking to Felix about his vulnerability. Kato had no idea what can of worms he'd opened by daring to leaf through the book. To his great fortune, this time around, none of the content left him in a state of tears. Embarrassingly, though, he'd been moved by the romantic tension between his brother and his boyfriend Raiden. Instead of being disgusted by the words, he'd understood now. Mars had been cautious in scripting his sentiments and despite his candidacy training, still doted on Raiden, though to a lesser extent. In his youth, Kato had heard several of the remarks his mother had made about Mars' sexuality, but he'd never known just how many damaging things she'd said. Most of her epithets were littered throughout the pages and they'd affected Kato as much as they must have affected his brother back then. His heart ached at the pain his brother had endured. All throughout his childhood, Mars had always worked to ensure that he treated their mother with respect. As he breezed through the earliest anecdotes, he understood why. The dirty blonde woman had inflicted terrible wounds upon Mars, for any reason and for no reason at all. It varied from the uncontrollable matters, his sexuality, his height, among other things, to the inane, his choice of the battle axe. The younger blonde had always thought Mars had changed preferred weapons because he himself had changed, but no, his mother had forced his hand and commanded him to wield a stronger weapon. It was disappointing too, because Kato had mostly picked the sword as his weapon to impress Mars and his brother had never really liked them to begin with. He saw the lapses in judgments that inked the pages too. Towards the end, his brother had become irrational and intense. He'd been jealous, compulsive, paranoid, and even had an intensive mean streak with his cohort mates. It was interesting to see the outgoing, but cautious and wary preteen develop into an obsessive, demanding tribute. In his brother's last year, they'd grown apart, and as he read through the pages, he suddenly remembered why. He suddenly recalled his brother's abruptness, stoic and tight attitude. Kato had been weak, then, though. On his very own first day of candidacy, the trainers had worn matching, knowing smirks. They'd recognized him, said they'd know the corn-silk blonde, with indomitable, but careful eyes anywhere. The duo had looked down at him with a condescending expression and cackled that they only hoped he had no one to hold him back like he and Raiden had held Mars back. Within 3 seconds, several faces had come to mind, but he'd waved away the thought. Dicey, Clove, Nero, and Nelly, they had only empowered him. They did not hold him back. It had become a mantra that he'd repeated to himself every day, because he couldn't afford to lose them again. He'd made this mistake before, years earlier, and he didn't dream of letting two half-wits who hadn't even been in their own games dictate how he chose to live his life. The only thing that could hold him back was hesitating, and consequently losing his opportunity, his prey, his bounty. And for Cato Elroy that wasn't a problem, because he'd never hesitate to give someone exactly what they were entitled to. They'd begun his descent into madness, gorging him with food, and strengthening him up. They'd served him 2 servings of steak each day, required him to do longer, more intensive weightlifting sessions, and had even forced him to engage in maddening rituals. The first had been forcing him to bath in blood. Another had been locking him in an empty room for 3 days. The worst had been administering hallucinogenic drugs that left him in a state of psychosis where he'd watch himself be eaten alive by rats. He supposed he was different from Mars. He'd stayed sane afterwards, kept himself rooted in the earth, and hadn't yet wasted away into nothingness. He hadn't let his attachments overtake him. Cato knew that Dicey, Clove, Nero, and Nelly were his and his alone. And Clove especially, she'd have to wait. When he returned, he'd take what had always been his, and she'd never have reason to speak out against him ever again. Together, they'd be unbeatable. Underscore 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 underscore. March, Hunger Games Year 74. I wasn't sure you were going to come home, Nurse Ebony said. Her curly hair was in a top knot at the top of her head. She gave him a gentle smile that helped soften his discomfort. I'm glad you're back, honey. Felix found a sense of solemn peace in her familiar green eyes. He hadn't recognized it at the time, but she'd been quite young the first time they met, only her mid-20s. I figured I should. I can't run from West forever, Felix said, quietly. I also wanted to settle my debts with the Annex. I can't imagine you have a debt. You completed your training and came home a victor. Can't do it any better than that, she teased. Not a tuition debt, but a long scribe of medical costs, Felix clarified. Can you get it for me? Nurse Ebony neared him. Can I sit with you first? Felix nodded affirmatively. Nurse Ebony pulled a chair up to his bed. I'm going to tell you something, Felix. All right. Yeah, sure. When you were 8, right after your mom and dad passed away, you started to get hurt a lot. You were lashing out to handle your grief, and Nero knew that these injuries were far too severe to treat on his own. I was proud of him for showing self-awareness in making sure you were taken care of. But eventually it became too regular, too expensive to do underneath the table. Did you get in trouble because of me? Nurse Ebony gently touched his shoulder in a reassuring fashion and he struggled not to flinch. No, but mostly because your work spoke for itself. To be ranked #1 for 2 years and never have slipped certainly helped, but I had a feeling this would only become a larger problem over the years. So, they let you give me care without paying up front because I was the best. Nothing in life is free, Felix, she said, shaking her head. No, I got you a sponsor. Like in the games? He asked, surprised. Similar premise, she said. But with a lot more strings attached. So, what do I owe them? He asked, failing to stall his nerves. Ebony looked to him with concern and said quickly. The strings were for the sponsor. I would never put you in an arrangement you didn't consent to, honey. They don't expect anything from you. I think your victory is reward enough. He shook his head, distrust in his tone. You said nothing is free, Nurse Ebony. So, who was it? Felix, it's okay. It was you. Wasn't it? He asked, frowning. But why? It was at first, Ebony said, reluctantly. But eventually we found someone of greater means who wanted to invest in your future. Tell me, Felix said, his patience waning. Tell me, or I'll solicit all of my records and find out myself. Ebony sighed, and he didn't want to do this, but he needed to know so he could fully protect himself. His name is Balthazar H. Clove's dad. He cut her off. The lieutenant has been paying for my bills all this time. Why? My brother knows potential when he sees it, or at least, he seems to think so, she said, dryly. But how? I've never even met him, and that's saying something considering how much time I've spent with Nero and Clove. Everyone here has a file, and yours was a mix of outstanding workmanship and some corrective action. My brother was rather impressed with your work, if not baffled by why you'd waste your talents creating so much trouble for others. Felix's face flushed with embarrassment. Do other kids have sponsors, Nurse Ebony? How do I sponsor children? Your question shouldn't be how, it should be if you can at all. Nope, he disagreed. My mind's been made. I'll talk to whoever I have to as long they need me to until they let me do it. Ebony only shook her head with dismay. All right, then. You have someone to sponsor in mind. The poorest 3 of every cohort. Her look of pride at that response made him uncomfortable. What? Don't look at me like that, he said, unable to face her directly now. You're a good one, Felix. Felix frowned. Good is the last thing I am, Nurse Ebony, and you know it. The lieutenant gave me a chance, and since it's probably better for me not to approach a military torturer, this will have to make do. A military torturer? Felix, have some respect, Ebony chastised, reprimanding him as if she were his own mother. My brother isn't a rogue agent for hire. He's an interrogator working to keep Panem safe. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way. When we were kids, Clove got upset with us, so she told my friend that her dad was a torturer who would come after us, so I've sorta had that image in my head ever since. These things are supposed to be confidential, Clove, she muttered. Felix suppressed a grin, though he failed to do so in time. Nero is so much like you. I'm glad I get both of you. He looked away, embarrassed. Ebony stood up, laughing lightly. She kissed his forehead, and this time he didn't flinch. We're pretty fond of you, too. Right before she got up to leave, he asked her, do you think I could write your brother a note? I suppose so, she said, contemplatively, and he gave her a grateful smile in response. Underscore 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 underscore. April, Hunger Games Year 74. For the first time in his life, Callan Wilder did not have a shadow. A long-haired, blonde, adoring shadow. He'd finally broken out of Hal E. Wilder's hold. They'd been called many things before: Siamese twins, an indomitable duo, a fitted puzzle piece. He loved his sister. In District 2, siblings were the only thing one usually had by default. Only children were for widows and divorcees. It couldn't be assumed that you had food, or a father, or even a chance of survival, but you typically had a sibling somewhere. Callan understood, because he rarely had enough food and didn't know his father, and his chances of survival depended entirely on how he played the odds. He had a discerning eye, though, inherited from Dicey, and a persistent outlook instilled by his mother. Good, he'd need both. Underscore 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 underscore. April, Hunger Games Year 74. Since when do you train on Sundays? Clove asked Dicey, standing in the doorframe to her home in pajama attire. Dicey shrugged, dressed in casual gym wear. I started to go on runs with Callan. I needed something to shake the depression from my bones, but he ditched me this week. As my best friend, I figured you might not be entirely opposed to taking his place. Clove pulled him into her house, closed the door behind them, and set him down on the couch. I'll be down in 2 minutes. I hope you've been working hard, Wilder. He waited patiently for about 15 seconds. Then, began moving throughout her living room, scanning over anything he could find before coming upon the Holloway Award case. Hanging inside were numerous medals, trophies, and plaques. Clove had an award for first place in knife throwing, clustered next to several others of the same kind. One for each year since '67. Clove's sister had her fair share too. A few for close combat, 2 for bladed weaponry, and the newest for strategy. Clove had the same medal, though it was much bigger. Nailed on the wall beside the awards case was a large, black plaque. Dicey would recognize the engraved symbol anywhere. Mr. Holloway was a leading military strategist for District 2, and though he'd only met the man twice, the auburn-haired teen knew he was not one to be reckoned with. He was like Clove in that regard. Mrs. Holloway, on the other hand, he'd met several times throughout the early years of his and Clove's friendship. She had been a stern, even-tempered woman, who had been protective of her daughters, arguably to the point of being overprotective. When she'd passed on, Clove had hidden herself from the world as if afraid she'd too perish when she left the house. After a few days, Dicey had come to entice her out of hiding, and she'd turned into a sobbing mess in his arms. He had been young then, only 13, and hadn't had a clue what to do with her. He'd seen her cry before, but only out of frustration, and this had affected him on a deeper level. So he'd remained in place, only holding her. They'd made their first of many mistakes that day, though he'd been too excited to care at the time. It was only in retrospect that he began to understand how special their first intertwining had been, even despite the uncomfortable and guilt-ridden context it had occurred in. During the first of their many mistakes, Dicey had seen her emotionally raw, vulnerable, and sweet. Clove has a great capacity to love, and in her own manner, she did. Intensely. "Let's go," Clove said with a challenging smirk, the familiar stopwatch in her hands, and Dicey nodded. "I know the perfect place to begin," he said, innocently. She told him, cockily, "Then you better hope you're a faster runner than I am." They locked the door behind them, and Dicey picked up a steady pace heading right. Clove followed him, watching as the sturdy tree's leaves waved gently with the wind. Clouds loomed overhead, though not dark enough to be even vaguely threatening. The rocks, some small, others not as much, and sand were familiar beneath the soles of her shoes. The cacti were prickly, the flora selection small, consisting mostly of a western variety of birds of paradise and tree flowers. The only fruit that grew in abundance were varying types of citrus. In the autumn, Dicey, and Cato walked along the city line, and would pick a few for the road home. The coy blonde had enjoyed salted grapefruits, and Clove had always wondered how he'd kept his teeth from falling out. He could be difficult to please, but his smile was always worth it. As they turned a corner, she stopped, and stared into the expanse before her. The quarry had been abandoned for the weekend as employees returned to their families, and she wondered briefly what it must have been like to never have enough, to always be in desperate need. Years ago, Dicey had told her that when he'd still been quite young, his mother had to choose each night which 2 children would eat. When she'd chosen Callan and Hallie once, he'd thrown a fit and screamed that she was the worst mother in the world. Only when he'd heard her crying herself to sleep had he understood that no parent wanted to have the burden of making that sort of choice. He'd crawled into bed beside his mother and told her that he was sorry for being bad. She'd cried even harder after that. "Looking for a part-time job?" Dicey teased, coming back towards her when he realized she hadn't kept up with him. "Do you hate her?" she asked, thoughtfully, from her spot on the dirt path. She started at the quarry uncomfortably. He frowned. "Who?" "Nero's girlfriend." "I don't know. You can't really control the family you're born into. The quarries might be a death sentence, but I try not to hold it against someone who's only doing all they've ever known." He yanked her arm. "You're slowing down my run." As they resumed their previous pace, Clove's thoughts trailed to other matters. She thought about the outlying districts, sectors where volunteers were uncommon, and where the desperately poor took out tessera with the knowledge that they had a slim chance of returning home should they be reaped. She had watched enough games to understand that the career districts, as they'd been referred to a few times, were not exactly popular among audiences in the other districts. Clove couldn't understand why that was, why they'd hold a grudge against a district where tessera was taken freely, 12-year-olds never entered the games, and one was given the opportunity to train for glory or trade entirely free of charge. It was a system they could work to adapt for themselves. River Mountain Park. Clove asked him, as they made their way onto the familiar grasslands. Their beginnings had been there, in a torrential downpour, Dicey in tears, her in an unsteady confusion. He looked to her with a quirky smile. "It's where I come to run away from all my problems." "Well, at least you're good at that," she told him, her expression serious as she recalled the distressed Dicey of so many years past. Dicey laughed, kneeling down. "Hop on. I've got something to show you." Clove obliged, jumping onto his back, and stifling her giggles as Dicey zoomed through the grass. When they passed the public washrooms, he warned her to be quiet and she agreed, though not without several questions of her own. "Look," he said quietly, gesturing his head to the right. Her eyes bugged out. 14-year-old Callan and 12-year-old Magnilda were resting on a familiar blanket, a basket of food between them, eating and chatting happily. Magnilda was wearing a yellow summer dress and had somehow curled her hair, while he was in a pair of jeans and blue polo tee. They were overdressed. At least, overdressed for them. "Are they?" Clove asked, her mouth hanging open. Dicey chuckled. "Want to have some fun?" With a sneaky smile, she inquired, "What were you thinking?" He paused, his eyes scanning the park, until he found exactly what he was looking for. Smirking, he galloped back towards the washroom. Clove jumped off his back and snatched the cleaning supplies basket from its corner, removing various chemical bottles and sponges. The pair went to the back of the building and tipped a hose into the bucket, filling it with as much water as they could. When they emerged from behind the building, their expressions were of pure gold. Callan had come over to Magnilda's side of the blanket and was doing the most to cuddle up to her. It was so perfect that Dicey was convinced the gods had set it up themselves. At first, the brown-haired duo were simply blathering on excitedly. There was no hand-holding, hugging, or horseplay. But as Callan inched closer to her sister, Clove and Dicey sped up, carrying the bucket as quickly as possible without being loud or wasting any of its contents. In its own right, their prank had been a discretionary drill. Magnilda stretched her arms and then threw some breadcrumbs to the black crows, who swooped in and flew off in only a few seconds. Callan grinned at her, leaning forward, and then... "What was that?" Callan spluttered, turning wildly. Magnilda wiped the water out of her face, rubbing at her eyes, and wincing. Callan let out a hacking cough, shivering. He instantly released a feral scowl at the familiar face, or should he say, familiar faces. Clove and Dicey had fallen to the grass, laughing hysterically at the young couple's faces. Callan looked furious, and Magnilda was about 3 different shades of red, about ready to cry. "What are you two doing here?" he demanded. The brunette tried to answer, but was laughing so hard, she couldn't form complete sentences. "Clove!" Magnilda screeched, lip quivering, "Why did you do that to me?" She finally caught her breath, lifting Dicey's chest up into a sitting position. Clove shrugged, a satisfied grin bewitching her face, "Because we thought it would be funny, and it really was." "You ruined my first kiss," her younger sister nearly wailed in response, and then flushed, pursing her lips, and turning to Callan, "You were going to kiss me, right?" He laughed at the question, tipped up her chin, and kissed her sweetly. "Does that answer your question?" Magnilda beamed, and then modified her demeanor, and huffed at the older teens. "Why are you here?" she asked, with a childish glare. "You said you were going to Hallie's," Clove admonished, wondering if she looked as non-threatening as girl before her. Lightly, she asked, "Since when do we keep secrets?" Dicey and Callan snorted derisively. "I did go to Hallie's." Magnilda shot back, growing more upset by the second. She ran her hand through her sopping wet hair, pouting to herself. Dicey chuckled, unable to stop himself from laughing again. "You're getting real technical there, Nellie." "You're too young to date," Clove added, hitting the auburn-haired boy for encouraging the duo. He should have told her the point to their excursion from the get-go. Callan grumbled a few choice sentiments, and when Clove prompted him to repeat them, he muttered lowly, "I remember when you and Dicey were 12. The older teens instantly froze. This was the last scenario they'd want to bring up those memories. Magnilda blinked, confused. "Wait, what happened when Clove was 12? Dicey and Clove. He stopped at Clove's threatening glare. Dated when they were about your age. Dicey gave his younger brother a betrayed scowl. Yeah, and we regretted it. A lot. We were too young to date. Clove nodded in the affirmative. You two better not get into messes. We literally cannot afford it, Callan Dicey remarked to his younger brother, and the dark-haired boy straightened up, all joy gone. Don't worry about me, Magnilda said with a sweet smile on her face. I'm a cheap date, Dicey. The auburn-haired teen began cackling his head off, unable to respond to that sentiment, and Clove hit him again, commanding him, cut it out. Magnilda looked at them, confused. It's just a date, Loie. If you didn't like dating Dicey, why did you do it so long? Callan grinned in response, looking an awful lot like his older brother. Yeah, you too. Why did you go on so many dates? He prodded. Clove stood up, done with the visit down memory lane. Giving the younger teens a severe look, she warned, Magnilda G. Holloway, if you get pregnant, Callan will kill you. That's Wilder family policy. Isn't that right, Dicey? Dicey nodded, sick to his stomach. He stood up, giving Callan a similar expression of his own, as Clove remarked. And if he doesn't kill you, I certainly will. You make one mistake, Callan, and you'll find I can do more with knives than throw them. Do you understand me? The couple nodded solemnly, a metallic taste filling their mouths, and a black cloud overhead. Underscore 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 underscore. April, Hunger Games Year 74. Dicey, a quiet voice peeked from the wooden door frame. He looked towards the sound, forcing a smile onto his face. You missed an adventure today, Hal. Hallie stayed in place, hesitating. He was stalling, and she didn't want to coax him into an unwilling discussion without his consent, but there were things that needed to be said. Can I talk to you? Dicey nodded, less than enthusiastic, and patted the spot beside him on the bed. Yeah, sure. Close the door. She stepped forward, briskly pulling the door behind her, and sat down. All the things she wanted to say seemed insufficient, not enough to absolve her of her sins against him. Hallie grabbed Dicey's arm, and leaned against it, hoping to leech some of his strength. He had always been her rock, and she felt he had paid too steep a price. What's wrong? He asked, gentle and full of grief. It's my fault you had to kill her. If I hadn't ruined everything, you wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. It all came out very quickly, as if she was afraid to hear his response. Hallie didn't even want to explain how she'd found out about the whole thing to begin with. With a morbid crudeness, he laughed. It doesn't work that way, Hal. I wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place if I hadn't fucked her without asking questions. Always ask questions. Might have killed the mood, Hallie teased, giggling. Hallie Wilder, what do you know about the mood? He replied. You don't know anything about sex. She giggled even more. Maybe. Hallie Wilder, you don't know anything about sex, he said, this time seriously. She leaned against him again, nestling into the crook of his back, and wrapped her arms around him. Only because you've protected me. I just wish someone was protecting you. Dicey's first instinct was to agree. Though it took only a few seconds for him to realize how pathetic such a thought was. He was among the best in his cohort, and was quite capable of handling anything that came his way. He shouldn't need anyone to protect him, and yet. I knew what I was doing and I will have to stand by my decision, because it's been done, but all these messed up thoughts won't give me a minute to breathe, or think. I've been having horrible nightmares. Such a small admission seemed to lessen the emotional burden and he exhaled in relief. I keep wondering if it would have been a boy or a girl. If they'd have had my hair. I'd always been picked on for it, but I never really minded, and... Hallie kept listening, holding him still. I could have used you as an excuse, but it was more than that, Hal. He rubbed his face. I'm used to having people depend on me. I kinda like it too, I think. But, if I'd had an infant of my own I would have only had Ashley. I kept thinking, what if I became like Dad? I'm fucking terrible at biology, but half of my DNA is his, and that means half of me is fucked up, irresponsible, selfish. Hell, the way I've been acting the last few years, I'm pretty sure all of me is. Her eyes glistened with tears, and she squeezed him tighter. I told her I couldn't do it. I was almost to the point of begging. I wasn't trying to cruel in the end. The kid would have been better off without me, but she was so determined. So I got rid of her, got rid of it. The heartbroken look in his eyes hurt her. Hallie had to bite her tongue to stop a sob. He gazed off into the distance. I've killed 123 people. 125, now, I guess. Not exactly anything new to me, but this was different. I could have had a kid. After it was all said and done, I told myself that I'd be more careful. I really thought that that would make me feel better, but it didn't. The blonde clutched to him tightly, and he smiled, briefly, sadly, and removed a strand of hair from her eyes. One day, when I do have a kid, I'll be the best damn father in this place. Not just for them, but for this little one too. I'll make it up to him. Hallie sifted through his words, and gently, she whispered, "You're nothing like him, Dicey. Nothing like him at all." He buried his face into her shoulder, and his chest began to heave, crying once again. Underscore 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 underscore. April, Hunger Games Year 74. Adie Fox combed through her notes, scribbling furiously. Every few minutes, she'd look down too far, and what Kato had originally thought were only reading glasses would slide off her face and onto the limousine carpet. In reality, she needed eyeglasses all the time, for images both near and far. He discovered that for several years, she had forced herself to train without them to avoid stigma. Begrudgingly, that had earned her an ounce of goodwill. Today, he'd ascend to a higher plane of living. He'd transcend his limits, and take another step towards attaining the highest honor one could. Perhaps carelessly, Kato had decided to give his attention to the moving scenery outside of his window instead of to his work. To East was different, he'd ascertained. Less abrasive, more artificial, modern, and plenty wealthier. He'd yet to see an unpaved road, and there were less single households and more compressed living quarters. Adie had called them high-rises. Instead of a single city center, the region was comprised of several markets of all sorts of different trades. The buildings had been plastered with pasty stucco, the climate remained warm, and one couldn't travel more than a single block without encountering palm trees, walkways, and crispy, dry air. In other words, it was another cover for the same book. The tournament he was to attend rotated locales each year, with each region competing for the potential lucrative gains to be made from hosting the event. He'd been only once before. In year 69, when his brother had vied for the title. That had been in 2 North. "Do you really think reading that nonsense will help you win, Fox?" he asked, watching the unfathomably high skyscrapers with awe as they drove closer to the facility. She ignored him, leafing through her books even faster. "Now, she decides to be quiet," he quipped, annoyed. Their coaches sat silently, enjoying glasses of wine with smug expressions on their face. To them, it was just dinner and show. Either way, they still got paid. He could have been nervous like Adie, but that would have been counterproductive. You were either ready or you weren't, and any last-minute studying wasn't going to make you stronger, or quicker, or even smarter. The ring was pure adrenaline, strategy to the wayside. In such an environment, he thrived. "When I win, I think I'll come back here. Maybe take a dip in their concrete lakes," he said to no one in particular. "They are called pools." "Do you even know how to swim?" she asked, looking up at him from her textbook for the first time in nearly an hour. Kato glared at her. "So what if I don't?" The long-haired girl sighed, returning to her materials with a shake of the head. "It's not that big a deal, Elroy. Try to relax." If he didn't know better, he'd have thought she was being kind. Adie Fox wasn't kind, though, and it was a big deal. He knew that when the game makers found weaknesses among the strongest tributes, they liked to level the playing field, to tip the scales. In an arena like the one Annie Cresta had won in, he'd have surely been lost at sea, and some other tribute, maybe a untalented fisherman from 4, would have probably won. "You picked a talent yet?" one of his coaches jibed. He had, long ago. He'd only told Clove. She'd smirked, playful, telling him it was a good choice. A good choice for someone like him. He wondered now if that had been meant to insult him. Cato could never be sure. Though, truthfully, he didn't mind a challenge, and that's exactly what his Clove had always been. Who cares about that nonsense? I'll be too busy to care about flower arranging or modeling. Those were the respective talents for Annie Cresta and Finnick Adair, resident District 4 scum. Adair in particular, as he'd mentored Dylan Sanders personally. "Feisty one, we've got here," the younger of the coaches said to the other, with a devilish smirk on his face. "Arrogance is unbecoming," Elroy the older woman added. Adie snorted, not bothering to look up from her book for that conversation, and he grinned slightly at her response. They'd shared few pleasant conversations, but one thing they had in common was a mutual loathing for their coaches. Still, there was no sense of camaraderie between the two. He didn't doubt for a second that Fox would have joined the strategic attack against Felix had she been a contender in the previous game. She was a slippery little snake, easing its way along the playing field, and the minute the alliance disbanded, she'd be his to kill. The previous year's tournament had been hosted in 2 West. Though, among their close-knit group, only Clove and Nero had attended. As they pulled up to the stadium, his eyes roamed to the daylit neon sign. They'd arrived at RE's Morgan Field. The amount of people in the condensed area was overwhelming on its own, but as he stepped out of the limousine, their cheers only heightened his senses. Adie was entirely nonplussed, adorning a discreet pair of earplugs. Why hadn't he thought of that? The coaches lead the way, and the pair were swiftly swept away into a medical office located within the stadium. There, the doctors recorded height, weight, body fat percentage, cholesterol, insulin levels, even blood type. Adie had tried to bait him with that one, "Oh plus, Elroy. You really are just like everyone else." He didn't bother dignifying that comment with a response, but reveled in the knowledge that she was O, which meant she would be screwed if she got hurt before the reapings. It'd be everything she deserved, he thought. When they were done, a representative dressed in a tie and suit, and quite attached to his electronic device, began leading them towards the stadium. "Miss Fox, you'll go first, against the candidate from 2 North." Adie asked for her competitor's name, but their representative answered so quickly neither of them could understand what the upright man had said. As they walked down the long hallway, Cato almost wanted to laugh at the way the Eastern folk styled themselves. Hardly anyone bothered with discretion. The girls wore cropped t-shirts and barely their denim shorts, while the boys were all in muscle tees, each and every one of them, even if they didn't have any muscle in the first place. Where was the dignity? One of the observers, a long-haired red-headed girl, stopped him, and gushed, "I hope you win, Cato Elroy." He shot her a dazzling smirk, before continuing behind Adie and their representative. Adie rolled her eyes at the display. "Jealous, Fox?" he asked her cockily. "Of you? I thought we settled that possibility a long time ago." "Smile, then, you frigid bitch. Today's the best day of your life. Underscore 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 underscore. April, Hunger Games Year 74. The ride over had been abysmally uncomfortable, and her only saving grace had been that once they'd arrived, Felix had been asked to sit in the front row. He had bid her and Dicey a dismissive farewell, before reminding Clove that she owed him a favor. He was the last person she wanted to owe anything, but being here was essential. Nero had set up a meeting spot for them and then hastily left to join Felix in the front row. Last year, she'd had nothing to lose. If Felix had lost, she probably would have laughed. He'd have deserved it, the rat bastard. This year, there was more at stake. To her fortune, or maybe her misfortune, she wasn't sure which, Cato had won his first round. The rules were simple, or so the commentator had said, last one standing won their round. But, there was a catch. The only weapon allowed in the ring were one's own two hands. The candidate from 2 South had been smart, agile, but it was clear from how quickly he'd gone down that he wasn't used to losing a fight, wasn't quite used to competing against someone on his own level. Kato, on the other hand, had lost several times throughout his life. It had shamed him then, but inevitably shaped him into a quicker healer, making him more durable and resilient than the dark-haired teen that lied on the floor, holding his knee in complete and bitter agony. It had only taken Kato 12 minutes from start until finish. A terribly unsatisfying fight, in Clove's opinion. Dicey had given her grief for complaining when Kato's life was at stake, but she didn't miss the expression of boredom on his face either. With a nightmare-inducing smirk, Kato made a final uppercut punch to the other candidate's throat, instantly shattering his vertebrae. The hit had been fatal. Clove had developed a long list of complaints as the coaches took Kato from the ring with hungry smirks. He was replaced by another 2 candidates, both carrying themselves arrogantly, snorting at the medic's attempts to clean up the leftover blood and swiftly remove the deceased candidate from his final resting place on the mat. As the match between the candidates from 2 North and 2 East began, Clove inconsolably hoped that whoever won this round would give Kato a run for his money in the final round. Clove found to her gratification that this match had definitely satisfied her bloodlust more than the one that preceded it. Candidates from 2 South were typically the poorest, the least well-fed, and rarely made it past the first round, so it had been expected for the blonde to have won his fight. 2 East and 2 North were wealthier, with East being the center of commerce and development, and North being the military hub and weapons manufacturer. The announcer's commentary was mostly useless. He knew very little about technique, and even used the wrong terms at several points throughout the matches, but Clove appreciated the statistical information. The candidate from 2 East, Chase Van Buren, had been born the 21st of November 1955, and stood at 6'0" and 220 pounds. His hair was a platinum blonde color, and he was nearly as tan as Kato himself. His competitor Taurus Winchester, however, was strikingly pale in contrast. Though, to his luck, was inordinately tall at 6'5", and weighed 245 pounds. Better yet, he was born the 5th of October 1957, making him the youngest of the 14s contesting for the tribute spot. Clove scanned the front row for Kato, but found the blonde was nowhere to be found. That level of blind arrogance infuriated her, and Dicey had to steady her shoulder to calm her down. The fight between the candidates went on for 29 minutes, and towards the end, the fight had been extremely close, but Van Buren had won, and would go on to be Kato's final competitor. Feeling better yet, Clo? Dicey asked, bemused. Kato is going to eat that pretty boy for dinner, Clove predicted. A black-haired girl stomped her foot behind her. No, he won't. Chase is the best in our entire class, she pointed to herself, and her, in Clove's opinion, band of trashy minions beside her. Considering how you're dressed, I doubt you understand technique well enough to know who's the best of your class. Clove remarked, completely nonplussed. The girl only scowled in return, sizing up Clove, and determining her odds of defeating her in a match. Dicey glared at the row of girls, and viscerally threatened, fighting in the audience is against the rules. So sit down and shut up. The girl only looked scandalized in return, and Dicey rolled his eyes. A moment later, he growled, turning back to the steaming girl, and muttered, I just saved you from a premature demise. Clove, he pointed to the girl beside him, is especially ruthless. She knows hundreds of inventive ways to kill, so unless you want her to give a live demonstration right now, I suggest you shut the fuck up and stop kicking the back of my chair. A second intermission took place, with more statistical data that was mostly irrelevant and only seemed jarring in contrast to the overall tone. No one gave a shit that Chase Van Buren played for his school's soccer team, or that he was voted most likely to become the next Finnick. Clove found it insulting to her intelligence that this is what the commentators thought she cared about him. Kato's face flashed on one of the screens, where it was revealed he had an 8% body fat percentage and a straighter average in all his courses. She wished she had a way to keep a snapshot of the screen indefinitely, because the thought that his school average had been written for all to watch amused her to great ends. I cannot wait for this fight to be over, Dicey complained, glowering at the screen that taunted him. Even here, everyone knows. Clove teased him. You can't actually be jealous of Cato. If he really were that smart, he'd trade every year for an ounce of common sense. Unless the arena is set inside of a math book, I doubt any of that will really help him much. Now, who sounds jealous? Dicey joked, elbowing her. As they brought the last contenders back into the ring, Clove was astonished to see how quickly the medics had repaired Van Buren's arms. She shook her head, thinking to herself that if they really wanted the best tribute, it would have been smarter to leave them with their wounds and see how they'd have made do, but whatever, at least the fight wouldn't be over before it started. That'd have been really miserable. Underscore 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 underscore. April, Hunger Games Year 74. If Chase hadn't been nearly 2 years older and 2 inches shorter, one might have thought they nearly identical twins. He was a pretty boy, and as the screen had broadcast, attractive enough to be the next Finnick Adair. Most of his repertoire came from the fact that the young man knew how to play a crowd. He was the ideal tribute in the same fashion as Finnick had been, but he was missing something. He was missing the most important thing, the viciousness needed to be a tribute. Cato grinned, smugly licking at his teeth in delight. Chase Van Buren was about to be served to his people on a golden platter. The audience was screeching, chanting commands. He'd never been appreciative of noise, preferring himself to a small crowd, a walk at night across the city line, or a paperback novel. Right now, though, he relished in their cheers, because they doubted him, they questioned whether he could win, and he was about to show them how much an error in judgment could really cost them. Chase Van Buren was nothing more than a caricature. He symbolized everything 2 East stood for: media attention, celebrity obsessive behavior, and devouring eyes. He seemed just as happy as the audience that surrounded him, clearly used to the undivided attention, but even that wouldn't save him. They were given a count of 3. 1. Look, mother, what I can do. 2. You're at rest now with your grief, AD. 3. My glory shall be a reflection of Panem, and the pride of District 2. The first 10 to 20 minutes of their fight consisted of punches, kicks, and a repetitive cycle of breaking one another's holds. It was tedious and uninteresting. They were too similar. In all regards, truly. Their builds were similar, their fighting style suspiciously close, and even their facial expressions were uncanny. About 25 minutes in, an audible gasp came when Cato knocked over the heavier teen, and held him down with his right leg. When Van Buren made a gesture to break his hold, Cato grinned maliciously, and proceeded to jump on top of his ribs several times before Van Buren was able to knock him away with his right arm. At around 32 minutes into the fight, they'd wrestled with each other, both taking heavy blows. It soon became difficult to find a spot in the ring that wasn't completely drenched in their blood, but Clove was enthralled. Cato mocked Van Buren as the platinum blonde attempted to lift himself from the ground. With his ribs in pieces, it was too much effort for him to manage. Cato grew bored of his competitor's lack of movement, strolled over to him, and yanked him by the roots of his well-cared-for hair. With a malicious smirk, he released his competitor's locks and went for his throat. In a last attempt to save himself, Van Buren knocked Cato away, and gouged his eyes with just a pair of his dirty fingernails. Cato cried out in rage, and swung aimlessly until he found his competitor, grasping so tightly on Van Buren's throat that he asphyxiated on his own vomit before Cato could snap his neck. His grey eyes rolled to back of his head. A few of the audience members were quick to voice their dissent, but their complaints were drowned out by the cheers as the rest of the crowd went absolutely wild. Having achieved another step in his path to glory, Cato stood up, and tried to look out towards the audience with as much resolve as he could. He was only able to manage this for but a moment before the pain became nearly unbearable and he threw his fist into the air as a last sign of victory, nearly wobbling out of the ring. The second he was out, a medic rushed to his side, and the blonde forced a worn smirk onto his face. "And he lives to see another day," Clove said, amused. "And he lives to see another day," Dicey agreed, warily. underscore 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 underscore. May, Hunger Games Year 74. If one didn't reside in District 2, they'd have thought a day like this was uncomfortable and uninvited. Despite the excessively warm temperature, it was hard for the citizens of 2 to suppress their excitement. Even Clove was bubbly and cheerful, smiling as the group made their way into the square. Magnilda rested piggyback style on Callan's back, with Hallie shooting them flirtatiously silly expressions. Clove's leather cowboy boots could have almost been an homage, a tribute to the old days, their history. In her green, cotton sundress, she was as dressy as she was going to get, but Nero thought she looked passable. He and Clove had agreed to accompany the kids to the square, while Dicey and Felix decided to escort Cato. She'd have never voiced the thought aloud, but Clove thought Callan and her sister were a nice pair. That didn't stop her from emotionally torturing him, though. Often, Dicey would have to pry her away, but he always did so with a laugh. As she got into line, the scanners took a small blood sample, and she was led away to the 16-year-old section. Nero and her parted ways, while the younger kids walked to their respective sections, debating with one another about what they wanted to do for lunch. The mayor began his annual speech. Welcome, welcome, District 2. Today is the day that we give glory to Panem, to show our utmost gratitude to the kindness the capital has bestowed upon us. Years ago, we made a caustic choice to fight against our inner nature, and betrayed our most generous caretakers, the benevolent individuals in the capital. Today, we repent for such actions, and strive to repay our debts, slowly but surely. Following this, the mayor read a scribe containing the list of the past victors, all 27 of them. Beginning with Slate Adams, third victor, and through the long list that clumped following the implementation of the training system in 25. During the first quarter quell, tributes were selected by public vote, and after one of their tributes won, District 2 designed an entire system around the concept. Nero tuned out most of it, having recited the list of 2 victors so many times he still heard the rhythm of the mnemonic melody in his head years later. Minor carrolled, 58th Games victor. Raoul Valajo, 59th Games victor. Inoberia Jamison, 62nd Games victor. Wyatt Armour, 63rd Games victor. And Felix Gray, 73rd Games victor. The audience paid their silent respects, and now, Mally Gold. Their escort strutted to the podium with an enthusiastic trill. "Oh District 2, darlings, it is so wonderful to see your beautiful faces again. Now, it's time to select our lovely tributes for the 74th Annual Hunger Games." The curly, blue-haired woman stepped up towards the reaping bowl and grabbed a handful of names, before dropping all but one of them. Carefully, she opened the slip of paper, and called out, "Mortar Erickson." A boy stepped out of the 15-year-old section, moving swiftly towards the stage for formalities. "Sake." "Hello dear, wonderful day," Mally introduced, warmly. Mortar smiled back at her, agreeing, "And where do you reign from?" Mortar blinked, flushing at the attention. "To north." "In the mountains, ma'am." "Splendid. Any volunteers?" she asked the crowd. In an instant, Cato flew forward, calling out, "I volunteer." The crowd began to holler and hoot at that, their applause overwhelming as he made his way to the stage and Mortar left to return to his section. Mally tailed her way over to him with a delighted smile. "And what is your name, darling?" "Cato Elroy," he grunted. That was spectacularly brave, and what a warm crowd. District 2 really does know how to enjoy themselves. "Ah, well, it's time to select your tribute partner." She returned to the reaping bowl, fishing for the right slip, and stole one from the very bottom. "And our female tribute is Clove Holloway." Cato smirked to himself, imagining how the games would play out if the two went into the arena together. One thing was for sure, Panem would be in for a treat. Clove snorted at the irony, trudging her way up to the stage, her boots clanking with every step. "What a lovely tribute, and where do you call home, sweetheart?" To her credit, Clove didn't snarl at the escort, as she would have most certainly done had anyone else called her sweetheart, but she didn't play along as nicely as Mortar, and only responded, "To west." Mally tried to hide her disappointment at the lack of engagement, Well, now, are there any volunteers? The crowd was silent. Pin drop silent. Kato waited for his tribute partner to step forward, but the silence continued. He knew that Dahlia was excited, but was she really so excited that she'd take this long to come forward? Such slow reflexes were a weakness, and he made a note to eliminate her as soon as the alliance dissolved. His patience quickly waned as he waited for the black-haired tribute from 2 South to claim her place, but to his grave misfortune, she never did. Underscore 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 underscore. Once, when Magnilda was maybe 7 or so, she came from training with tears streaking down her heated cheeks. Her mother had given her a gentle smile and asked what was wrong, but she had just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed until her mother turned away. This had only further upset Magnilda, and the entire commute home she had kicked the back of her chair. When they had gotten out of the car, she had rushed over to her mother's side and grabbed onto her arm, demanding attention, but all her mother did was pull away and ignore her, so she started crying again, this time much louder. A few minutes later, her father returned from base and warily asked his wife why she had been ignoring their daughter. In response, her mother had simply said that if Magnilda wanted something, she needed to ask for it. Magnilda had huffed, angry, and stomped up to her mother, grumbling that she wanted to tell her something, but her mother had only hushed her and began reciting a storied moral. Whenever one commits an action, makes a decision, or uses their voice, they are expelling energy. In return, they receive a reaction, and the goal, her mother had said, is to garner the most reward for the least energy exchange. As Magnilda stood in the front row with the rest of the 12-year-olds, she wondered what her mother would say now, as she cried desperately, with the knowledge that it would change nothing. Ariane was gazing at her uncomfortably, and inching away, clearly embarrassed at the spectacle she was making of herself. The crowd was silent at first, and then several thousand eyes feasted upon her. District 2 was too dignified to boo or jeer, but a thought came to mind at the sight of Magnilda's distress: Clove Holloway would not survive. How had this happened? In District 2, where the population was nearly 1 million and reaping eligible youth comprised around 20% of the overall population, there was a 1 in 200,000 chance one's name would be pulled from the bowl. Of course, this disregarded several factors, such as tesserae, cumulative slips, and plain old bad luck, but such calculations would have only lured her into a state of insanity faster anyways. Clove stood on stage, a bored, wary sort of expression bestowed upon her face. Kato, in contrast, looked distracted, but succinctly upset. The mayor began to read the Treaty of Treason, which Magnilda had always thought was so beautifully dictated. Though, now, in her disillusion, only sounded dry and meaningless. After the anthem played, 2 peacekeepers came up towards the tributes and escorted them off stage. The crowd dispersed, muttering to themselves, and Magnilda ran past them. In the distance, she heard Callan call out to her, but she knew that nothing he would say could fix the irreparable damage that had been done. As she pushed her way past the back entrance of the Justice Center, she tried to conceive exactly what she would say. She wasn't stupid, not by a long shot. She knew that Dicey and Nero would use flowery, cautious language, and try not to take sides. Why bother, though? Only one would emerge victorious, and if you couldn't be honest even in someone's death, then you were committing a grave injustice. It took 10 agonizing minutes for all of the collective visitors to gather. On Clove's behalf was her father and aunt. Magnilda didn't recognize Kato's family, having never officially met them, but she noted a tall, regal, dirty blonde woman with stunning green eyes, a tall man with cornsilk blonde hair, and a young blonde boy with blue eyes. Kato's mother didn't seem too enthused to be in the same space as Kato's father, shooting him a nasty expression, which he did his best to ignore. Dicey and Nero stood together in a corner, discussing matters in hushed whispers. The dark-haired girl leaned against the wall, waiting impatiently as the peacekeeper beckoned the first set of visitors into the separate rooms. Their father went in first, and Kato's mother pushed past Kato's father to be their son's first visitor. Her aunt came up behind her, and rubbed her right shoulder reassuringly. "It'll be fine." Magnilda responded back irately, "I didn't say it wouldn't be." She flushed when several eyes turned to her, including Kato's father, who she vaguely recognized. Maybe solely from his strong resemblance to his son. Her aunt didn't move, only giving her a sympathetic expression. It wasn't entirely out of character, after all, she was a nurse who was used to taking care of others, but her aunt couldn't possibly understand what she was going through. When Nero's father had gone into the games, she'd expected him to win. Magnilda couldn't even say that for Clove. Kato's mother emerged first, and the peacekeeper ordered the next visitor in. His mother left the building and Kato's father entered next, leaving the young boy on his own. He grinned up at Magnilda, blushing excitedly. "My name's Oliver." "I'm Nellie," she replied, dully. "Kato's going to win. He's super strong." She stood, aloof. "Has he taught you how to fight yet?" He said too. Oliver counted on his fingers, 1, 2 years. Her father emerged from the room a moment later, a solemn pride on his face. Nero stepped forward to replace him, and only a minute after, Kato's father came out, and Oliver ran forward, giggling cheerfully. Underscore 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 underscore. Kato's enthusiasm had dimmed considerably since getting ready with Dicey and Felix, though he couldn't hide a relieved sigh when his brother came into the room. "Kato! Kato!" His younger brother ran into his arms, grinning. The teen brushed him off brusquely, and kept him at an arm's length. "Come to wish me luck, lolly." The small boy shook his head, biting his lip coyly, and stifling a giggle. "Nah, because you don't need it." He chuckled, "I suppose I don't." He intertwined his fingers. Oliver tried to think of what else to say, but Kato pulled him closer, and told him a strange tone, "You're growing fast." "I'm this many," Oliver said in return, holding up 4 fingers. It was unfortunate that Kato had always had an affinity for cute things. "You've got the makings of a champion." The small boy jumped up, his eyes widening. "I do." Kato smirked. "Doubting yourself is your first mistake." He frowned. "What's that mean?" "It means that to be a winner, you have to act like a winner." Oliver nodded, trying to feign understanding but failing. "Okay. One day, I'll be strong just like you." Kato snorted, and his semi-cordial demeanor waned. "It'll take a lot of work. You'll have to tell Sandra to stop babying you. Training is sacrifice, blood, sweat, tears, and your worst nightmares come to play. It's broken arms, cracked ribs, and gaping wounds that never fully heal. It's psychosis, sickness, and unwavering resolve. The monsters your mother reads to you about, they can't compare to the monsters inside your very own head." He yanked Oliver's roughly by his wrist, making sure the boy was paying attention, and clenched tightly. The small boy fussed, trying to break his grip, but Kato only strengthened his grasp. "Do you think you can handle that?" Oliver trembled, whimpering at the uncomfortable hold. "Well, do you?" Kato demanded. Tears welled up in Oliver's eyes, and he blinked, and they fell to the ground. The blonde teen shook his head, disappointed, and released his brother's hand, softly muttering, "It's your worst nightmare for 12 years, but when you win. When you win, it's everything you've ever wanted and more. Do you think you can handle that?" Oliver swallowed, terrified by the wild expression in Kato's eyes. Wiping away his tears, he retreated towards the door, and opened it slightly. "One day, when I'm big and strong, I'll do anything to get the monsters out of your head. I promise." Kato stalked forward and pushed his brother to the floor, and glaring. The small blonde boy ran out of the room, sniffling, and Kato's father sighed. He looked sternly at Oliver. "I told you to not to aggravate him." Oliver latched onto him, crying into the hem of his shirt. "Daddy, I want to help Kato." He said there are monsters inside of his head, he murmured sadly. Mr. Elroy's gruffly responded, "Kato doesn't need help. He just needs to win." He picked up Oliver, and held him protectively to his chest. His demeanor reminded Magnilda entirely too much of Mars, and that only increased her reservations. The peacekeeper asked if there were any more visitors. Dicey stepped forward, and took her place. Underscore 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 underscore. Come to bid the corpse farewell? Clove asked him bitterly. Dicey gave her a pathetic smile. Don't sell yourself short. You're Clove Holloway. She came forward and he pulled her into his arms. She melted into the embrace, a too familiar hold. His eyes watered as it all sank in. Even if Clove did survive, Cato wouldn't. There'd be no true winner. Cato and Clove were cut from the same cloth, a fitted piece. Sure, they rarely saw eye to eye, but there was not one without the other. In his ruminations, they stood together, giving him grief and making sharp remarks at his expense. For the first time in his life, he wished they lived somewhere else. A world away from the games. Killing is easy, but I'm not as refined in the art as you. His brown eyes glimmered with an unreadable expression. To make an admission like that was unheard of, especially from her. It was the only way for me to stay in the program. Most don't have to do what I've done. Most have the time to earn their points the hard way, the right way. I haven't had that sort of time in years. What's your number, then? She asked. He rested his hand on a chair, not exactly excited to share something so intimate to him. 125 overall, with 48 this year. Impressive, she muttered, rubbing her fingers anxiously. They'd confiscated her knives, he was sure. I'm up to 36. This year? He asked, surprised. She gave him a bemused smile. Overall, red. Dicey pushed a buoyant strand out of her face, and distractedly played with her hair. Be brave, Clove. Clove pulled away and with a fierce determination, but uncharacteristic gentleness, told him, I'm not afraid, Dicey. If anyone can overcome insurmountable odds, it's you. The brunette smirked. Exactly. Don't count me out. His laugh mixed with a sob. She gave him a displeased expression, and thrust her fist against his abdomen. I'm not dead yet, asshole. He pulled her back into his arms, laughing more than crying. You've always been a fantastic contester, he teased. He heard a knock a moment later and suppressed the urge to give the nosy peacekeepers a piece of his mind. Give them hell. She stood up, fixing her posture, and adjusting her green dress. Firmly, she told him, I'm glad I've had you, Dicey. I'll never have a best friend better. Dicey smiled sadly, and whispered, earnestly, patting her hair into his neck. Thank you for giving me a chance, Clove. Underscore 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 underscore. Magnilda locked the door behind her as she entered the room. Upon seeing her, Cato gave her a wary, exhaustive sort of look, and rasped. If you're here to ask me to sacrifice myself, don't bother. Don't patronize me, Cato. Magnilda responded, an unkind coolness slipping into her words. What do you want, Magnilda? He asked, folding his arms. She stepped forward, glowering at him. My name is Nellie. You're too old for nicknames, he said, dismissively, before adding, and much too old for hair ribbons as well. He yanked the teal bow out of her hair. She winced, looking back to him with a scowl as she fixed her hair into place. Her glare intensified as he smirked at her. Yes, she drawled, her tone laced with fury, it looks better on you anyways. He blinked, before chuckling, blackly, you're no Clove. I've never tried to be Clove, and if that's why you became my friend in the first place, then you've wasted your time. Of course not, Cato said, holding his head at her unusually high pitch. No wonder Clove doesn't want to be your friend. He laughed, a sick smile on his face as he mocked, no, your sister wanted us to be much more than friends. Yeah, so did I, Magnilda said, disappointment underlining her words. That seemed to stump him. Anything I say won't change why you're here, and that's because you want something. So spit it out. Magnilda tried to contain herself, to hold on to what little dignity she had left. Fine, that's fair. I do want something. He arched his eyebrows, waiting for her response. Oh, yeah. And what might that be? She whispered her request, quietly begging for this indulgence, and a light of recognition flashed in his eyes. He masked his pain, before lowly gritting out, I can't make any promises. Magnilda nodded her understanding, but he added with an emptiness in his chest, but I'll try. Underscore 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 underscore. Hunger Games Year 74. Underscore 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 underscore. Dicey and Nero had prepped him, offering him a pep talk to boost his morale, but he wasn't so sure it was working. No mercy. Do not presume loyalty. No direct eye contact. Store clothing securely. Do not be wasteful. Keep a mental checklist of surviving tributes. Somewhere in between all their belligerent instruction, his stomach had become knotted in an unfamiliar ache. He'd had his fair share of abdominal pains before. From injury, hunger, and even nerves, but this was distinctly foreign. Cato lost his concentration and they stared on at him, worried, theorizing that they'd overstimulated him, but he shook his head. Keep going, he told them, trying to regain his equilibrium. Nero had pulled up a chair behind him and ordered him to rest, but he refused. Dicey didn't take kindly to such a response and forced him into the seat, continuing. Do not overexert yourself, if at all possible. His clipped tone indicated that he meant starting now. If you can't find water, forage for fruit or collard greens. If you're cold at night, use one of the backpacks from the cornucopia as a barrier of insulation between you and the ground. If heat becomes unmanageable, rest under a tree or seek grasslands. Cato wondered how much of their advice would be truly useful. He'd be resting in comfortable tents, an abundance of sponsors at the heel of his requests. The camping tips were well-meaning, but seemed misplaced, and right now they were fraying his nerves. Pay attention, you idiot. Dicey quipped, hitting the side of his head, and Cato shook his head hazily. He moaned a complaint, I don't need any of this. Don't be arrogant, Nero shot in return. Did you waste Clove's time like this too? The blonde asked, fatigued from dizziness. Nero and Dicey exchanged a glance, before Dicey remarked shortly. We didn't have to. Clove already knows all of this. Then why are you even bothering? I'm sure she'll tell me what to do if anything necessary happens. His friends exchanged another glance, before eerily remarking in a castigating synchrony, do not presume loyalty. Clove loves me, Cato challenged them, a light of dismay in his electric blue eyes. He didn't appreciate the admonishing expressions the two were wearing, as if there was any alternative to his victory. Nero arched a brow, sighing, even if that's true, you're acting like it'll mean anything. Clove's no sacrificial lamb. There's no such thing as nobility in the Hunger Games and she'll be vying for the top spot just as much as anyone else. Maybe even more so, Dicey added, considering the state you left her in. His ash-brown companion nodded in agreement, I'm afraid this won't end well for either of you. Dicey grinned, but, hey, then the two of you can recite your vows from 6 feet under. That's not funny, asshole, Cato responded. It's kind of funny. It's fucking depressing is what it is. Where the hell is Felix? Dicey inquired. He's going to miss the visiting period if he doesn't come soon. Cato snorted, probably rubbing one out to the fact that Clove and I will have to kill each other. Dicey started laughing hysterically at that response and Nero exhaled a wary groan, we don't have time for jokes right now. A knock on the door affirmed the statement and he gestured towards the sound. Cato looked at the two of them, almost wondering for a split second what if this was the last time he would ever see them. The stray thought prompted a minor bit of anxiety, and he blurted the words out without thinking. Thank you for helping me. Really, thank you. Nero gave him an encouraging half smile. Keep a level head, all right. Dicey smirked, jabbing Nero with his elbow, gotta be a little more realistic. How about, cut 'em clean? Nero slapped Cato's back, and bid him farewell and good luck. Dicey stayed for only a second longer, slinging his arm around Cato, and patting him reassuringly. I'm really proud of you, Cato. You've come a really long way, and I'm glad I've had you as my brother throughout it all. Hey, Dice. Yeah? Dicey asked. I need you to do me a favor. Underscore 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 underscore. At the end of their visits, the peacekeepers came to collect the tributes and led them directly to the train station located adjacent to the square. Media reporters hounded them, flashing their cameras and buzzing loudly and incoherently. It reminded Cato of Adi, how she used earplugs, and a sort of solemnness came to mind. He blocked the gruesomeness of her death from his thoughts, and gave the reporters a chilling smirk. Clove only ignored them, acting as if they weren't worth her time. In her mind, she probably believed that, and that would be her first mistake, he thought. As they made their way inside the train, Clove gawked at the outlandish luxury, but closed her mouth, and said nothing. Mally Gold, their escort, strut up to them, enthusiastically welcoming them in and giving them a quick tour. Now, your mentors are not quite ready to see you yet, but if you'd like, your rooms are to the right. Each are fully equipped with a shower, a dressing area, and bed chamber. I'll come back for you darlings when dinner is ready, but please be dressed by 6. The blue-haired woman wandered off happily to her own compartment and Cato gave Clove a look over, to which she responded with a smug expression, nervous already. He scoffed at the possibility, why would I be? There's nothing coming between me and victory. She laughed, as if he was absurd, still looking too smug for his liking. We'll see. Wouldn't want you to go soft. For what, you? If you're relying on that, better become prepared for death. After all, we're just Cato and Clove, he mocked, and slammed the door in her face. Clove took a heavy breath and retreated to the assigned bedroom. Pulling off her boots, she entered the washroom, and walked into the shower. Pressing the closest button to the door, she sat on the floor, and imagined herself to be far away, in a warm rain. It was too early in the year for rain, or maybe too late, she wasn't sure. She began to sob, long strands of her hair sticking to her face. Clove's only comfort was that her temporary weakness was a concealed secret. She was safe, for now. The girl closed her eyes, wondering to herself if there had been any signs of their impending demise. Pulling her knees to her chest, she thought grimly to herself that if she did die, she'd see her mother again. Her precious, loving, resourceful mother. It was a small crack in her armor, but Clove couldn't stop herself from crying once she'd started. In another life, it might have been comforting to be done in by a lover, and in District 2, maybe even a bit seductive, but now it only seemed cruel. Underneath the layers they'd painted for him, Cato Elroy was just another teenage boy. In her anxiety, she began to laugh, thinking of all the moments they'd had between themselves. If she squinted her eyes, she could still pretend he cared for her, could pretend he'd kept the promise he'd failed to uphold so many times before. It must have been an hour before she lifted herself from the muddled water, her green dress stuck to the tile, her hair slick against her cheeks and covering her eyes. Pull yourself together. The brunette peeled off the soaked dress, letting it fall to the floor, before reaching for a towel to dry herself. It was very soft, a capital luxury, and Clove allowed herself one more minute of weakness before standing straight and moving towards the dresser. Inside the wooden drawer were countless outfits, most too exuberant for her to even consider, but she pulled out a pair of black leather jeans and a button-up, blue silk top, and told herself it was time to get to work. Scavenging through her bedside drawers, Clove tried to find paper and something to write with, but to no avail. She nearly fell off the bed and knocked over a capital lamp, but caught herself at the last minute. Just as she was about to seek out Mally, she heard a knock, and moved to answer it. When she opened the door, Clove found that it was not her peppy escort, but instead a too familiar face. She leaped forward, growling, "You!" A feral expression lit her eyes and her right hand enclosed around the raven-haired teen's throat callously. "This is your fault. underscore 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 underscore. Felix contemplated to himself whether that could be true or not. After all, the capital had already taken so much from him, why not take it a step further? Cato thankfully quelled the guilty thought with a dismissive scoff. He wasn't the one who pulled your name out of that bowl. He brushed Clove off of him, trying to be careful with her for once. He fortunately succeeded in the endeavor and made a note to tell Nero he could be gentle after all. You look scared, and why may that be, little H? She turned to Cato, and spat, have fun working with the rat bastard. Then demanded of Felix, where is my mentor? Well, is this my tribute? An amused voice inquired. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, considering the crying pipsqueak. What a tender moment, but not at all appropriate for reaping of two. Clove froze, struck in total awe of the woman before her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Cato snorted, amused, then hit her shoulder. Athena Mansfield is talking to you. Clove remained in place, and he apologized on her behalf. You'll have to excuse her. You're her idol. So Mr. 73 said when he begged me to be her mentor this round in place of Inoberia, Athena remarked in her return. Cato's eyes traveled questionably to Felix, cocking his head curiously. Clove broke out of her transfixed expression to watch him suspiciously as well. Taking a deep breath, Clove looked at the red-haired woman, still a bit starstruck. My name is Clove Holloway. Well, you're lucky I made it. Inoberia nearly came for my throat when I agreed to take her place, and well Brutus. She smirked at Felix. If he didn't have such a soft spot for Mr. 73, he'd have probably torn him limb from limb for even asking to substitute for him in the first place. Felix averted his eyes uncomfortably. Maybe inviting Athena hadn't been his best choice after all, if she was going to continue providing inside information on his relationships with his neighbors. And why would you want to do that? Clove asked, eyeing Felix contemptuously. Felix recollected his momentum. Well, I couldn't miss all the fun, now could I? Athena seemed like just the right piece to remind you what you're fighting for, so I guess we all win. I don't know what's going on among you three kids, but I do not put up with any bullshit. I may have won 20 years ago, but I still take this very seriously. As I'm sure you gathered from watching my games, my weapon of choice was a knife, but I survived on intelligence alone. It wasn't until the very end that I created my finest work of art, and if you're lucky, you'll give them something to remember you by too, but that's all in due time. Clove straightened her posture. I won't disappoint. Good, because you've got a lot of ground to cover. We'll have to work quickly. Yes, Clove agreed. The tension dissolved as Mally ran in, trilling happily, Dinner is ready. I thought it'd be nice to catch a glimpse of the other tributes. Now doesn't that sound fun? Felix only chuckled, flirtatiously returning, you really enjoy this work, don't you? Well, of course. District 2 has such a wonderful reputation and does so much for our precious capital. Mally gave him a pat on the back that he distanced himself from instinctively. It is so nice to see that you've lightened up, Felix. You weren't faring so well when we returned you home post-tour. It makes me very happy. Athena nodded in agreement. Yes, not at all. I'm surprised you had the nerve to speak up at all since we hardly see you around the village. Yeah, I've really come full circle, he said hastily, waving them off. Let's keep ourselves focused on our prized tributes. Mally, if you could, we'll need note-taking material. We'd like to start our strategy right away. He gave her a grateful look, and she smiled agreeably as she trailed away to fulfill his request. Thank you, he called. Certainly, and Felix could hear that she was likely still smiling. Isn't she 35 years too old for you, Fix? Clove asked at his demeanor. Athena laughed. With all of that nonsense plastered on her face, you'd never know she's barely 30. She's really something, Miss Gold. Quite lovely underneath the decker. Small talk has been a real pleasure and all, but I'd like to get to work. Cato grit out, looking not at all rested from the intermission. Clove nodded her assent and her mentor gestured for her to lead the way. As they made themselves comfortable, an empty silence fell on the group, and seconds later a recap of the reapings began. Underscore 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 underscore. District 1 was old-fashioned, traditional as far as their reaping practices went. They began with selecting a female tribute first. In 2 and 4, reapings began with male tributes. They were outlandish and absurd, but would probably assimilate well with the Capitolites. The first to be reaped was a young woman in her mid-teens with luxurious, black hair. As she elegantly made her way to the stage, she postured to the crowd. She was attractive, but entirely too overdressed for a reaping, and he wasn't sure if that was even possible. The aquamarine-haired escort asked for volunteers, and a blonde girl called out from one of the sections towards the back. As she made her way through the crowd, the audience stared at her in utter disbelief. When she replaced the reaped girl, who was sent back into the crowd, they burst into hysterical cheers, overwhelming even the escort who tried to look enthused. Mally gazed on with a smugness Cato hadn't thought was possible of the bubble-brained woman. "Ah, I think they like you," the escort said to her, still trying to recover from the moment. "Introduce yourself, honey." The steaming blonde had to mask an expression of dismay, and only said sweetly, "Glimmer Maxwell." For the boys, the escort remarked, pulling a name from the bowl, "Marvel Sinclair." Marvel quickly made his way towards the stage, and by the look on the crowd's face as he turned up the last stair, he wasn't interested in being replaced. He flashed the escort a winning smile, shook her hand, and waited as she asked for volunteers. When no one stepped forward, he gave the crowd a wide smile, and before he could do anything else, the tributes were escorted off stage. Capitol commentators took this moment to insert their own assessments, which Cato ignored as he began scribbling notes onto his paper. He stared at the paper blankly when he realized he didn't actually remember District 1's names, and stole a glance at Clove's sheet, which had cartoon doodles of their faces, focused on their most prominent features, which she'd evidently decided were the blonde girl's heavily made-up eyes, and the male tribute's curly brown mop. In his notes, he labeled them as Sexbot and Cherub. District 2 followed, with the replay showcasing Cato stalking forward, a strong, determined expression on his face. He kept a stoic repertoire throughout the reaping, only lapsing for a brief moment when no one stepped forward to claim the female tribute position. The cameras seemed to purposefully omit Magnilda crying. Clove exhaled in relief at that. "You seem displeased by the turn of events," Athena said to him, after the replay of their reaping. Felix answered the underlying question in Athena's statement. "You'll have to become acquainted with that expression real quick. It's one Cato seems to always wear whenever he's thinking too much." "And what were you thinking of?" Athena asked him, trying to decide what approach to take with the tall, limber blonde. In forced politeness, he coolly said, "I was thinking, where the fuck is Dahlia?" Underscore 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 underscore. "She's dead," Nero told him, his face closing in on the videophone monitor. He shrugged, or at least that's what the southern girls were saying on their way out of the square. Felix clenched his teeth together. "She better hope so, because if not, she'll definitely be when I get home." The other end was silent for a moment, before Nero asked him, "Where are you, Felix?" "You've guessed it by now, Nee. So just say it." "Felix. Why would you put yourself in this position?" Nero asked. "It's not like either of you are eligible to. At least we know I'll do the best I can." "I believe that, Felix. It's just." Nero sighed, morosely. "Are they okay?" "They're." Felix stopped for a second, looking around behind him, acting like it's business as usual. "It's a little worrisome, actually, because they're not acting like a team. Keep a close eye on them." Don't let them get disqualified before the games have even begun. They wouldn't risk their glory to scruff up another tribute, Felix reassured him. No, not the other tributes. Felix frowned. With each other, Dicey clarified. Cato and Clove aren't exactly on the best terms right now. What do you mean they're not on the best terms? Felix balked, thinking of the various strategies they would ruin with that admission. Nero shook his head warily. They were together, for at least a short period of time, and then there was a breakup. That's real fucking wonderful, Felix said sarcastically, but after contemplating the thought, added, actually, it is a lot better than the alternative, though. Which is them pulling some in Fair Verona shit. You've read Romeo and Juliet. You're missing the point. If you wanna test your endurance, call M star-crossed lovers and see how long it takes for one of them to tear out your esophagus, Dicey teased him, trying to diffuse the morbidity. The black-haired teen leaned in forward and waved them away tiredly. I'm off. Try not to wet yourselves while I'm gone. I'll be in touch. Underscore 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 underscore. He now had several lined pages filled with mostly useless data and unkind nicknames. His notes addressed the estimated height and weight of the tributes, as well as anything for him to keep an eye out for, but that wasn't really much. They weren't really much. This year's selection were a disappointingly boring bunch, in his opinion. Sure, there was Cripple Kid from 10, he'd gone the creative route in nicknaming this tribute, but other than the well-built man from 11 and the sure-to-be bloodbath volunteer from 12, it had been an incredibly unsatisfying reaping. Deciding he needed more information to assess his competitors on, he left his room and moved towards Clove's room, not even bothering to knock before entering her bedchambers. Upon seeing his face, she put on a scowl. What do you want? He had to give it up to Clove to make you feel like you were the lowest form of sentience just by the tone in her voice. Cato rolled his eyes. I need to see your notes for cross-referencing. No, we're not friends, she rebuffed him, coldly. You said that. He stalked forward, a menacing look on his face, and grabbed her throwing wrist, demanding, is this about me refusing to fuck you, Clove? Because I'd be more than happy to oblige you. Clove tore her arm away from his grasp. His arm reached forward, closing in on her, and roughly tore the top half of her silk blouse open. She gawked at him, furious, her face reddening. Are you crazy? Get off of me. Oh, don't be coy, Clove. Cato smirked. I'll make it good for you. She struggled against him, kicking him in the knee, but he kept moving closer to her, entirely unaffected. Let me go, she screeched out, desperately. At this point, she was shaking, and when she focused her eyes on his, she noted a glassy look in them, a distant disconnect and far-off look. This time, Clove hit him in the stomach. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me, she screeched out, scrambling away from him. Confusion seeped into his eyes, breaking his nearly mechanical pattern of behavior, and he looked on at her, asking softly, Clovey. She took advantage of his wobbling confusion and jumped onto him, forcing him onto the mattress. Which, while not quite strong enough to do any damage, was helpful enough to put her in the upper hand position. He fell onto his back, holding his head, and tears streaming down his face. He touched his cheek, out of place, and moaned in pain. Now Clove was confused. I didn't even push you that hard. What are you doing? Cato clutched his stomach in an agonizing pain and she watched him warily. What the hell is wrong with you? She had meant the question specifically in the context of why are you molesting me, but he didn't seem cognitively aware enough to understand what was happened around him. Instead he only replied, I need my pill. Where are they? The pills. He blinked his eyes a few times, before falling against the bed. This time she didn't come to his aid. Underscore 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 underscore. Trigger warning for references to sexual abuse. underscore 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 underscore. His dreams were vivid, technicolor, but saccharine and hellish. There she was. Her red lipstick smeared across his cheek, tousled hair, and haunting eyes. He'd run, swiftly as he could, but the walls would close in on him and hold him hostage. Her amused cackle echoed in the sudden darkness, taunting him. "Where do you think you're going?" She slithered over to him, a seductive tone in her voice, and cupped his chin. "You'll enjoy this." He tried to voice his opposition, but it swelled, never leaving his throat. His mouth had been replaced by a zipper, with cracks running across his lips, and blood dribbling down his chin. The manicured hands ravaged his chest, exploring every inch of him appreciatively and violently, her nails raking down his back. Roughly, he yanked the zipper open and each of his teeth fell, one by one, to the ground. "Don't do this," he begged. With his heart about to beat out of his chest, he shook her, and repeated the pleas. She tutted at him, only admonishing honestly, "It's undignified to be so histrionic." Underscore 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 underscore. As soon as Kato had fallen unconscious, she had made a mad dash for the only other unoccupied room on the train. That room just happened to be Kato's. She locked it forcefully. His reaping attire, which consisted of a navy blue suit and white undershirt, were still in a messy heap on the floor. The bed was still neatly made, with notes strewn on top of the covers. She collected them into a pile and placed them on the side drawer. Clove climbed into the bed and took a heavy breath, trying to stop the incident from replaying in her head once again, but failing miserably to still herself. Kato had actually tried to force her to have sex with him. He'd torn at her blouse and would have gone farther had he not collapsed. It was hard to decide on which emotion to settle on first, because there were so many bubbling up all at once. Predominantly anger and dismay, but she would have been lying if she hadn't admitted that fear was amongst the highest ranking. He was about 8 inches taller than her, with a good 80 pounds of muscle to his aid. No matter how much Clove tried to assure herself that she could have fought him off, she knew that if he'd really wanted to fuck her against her wishes, he'd have taken her with barely any extra effort. The brunette couldn't figure out what scared her more, the thought that the person she had considered her best friend had nearly raped her, or the fact that she was still worried about him. Kato had entirely blindsided her. It wasn't as if the blonde didn't have plenty of offers, he did, but he'd been more of a celibate hero. So why now? Underscore 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 underscore. Kato woke with a stir. The blonde held his head, unable to remember how he'd gotten to bed last night. Now that he thought about it, this wasn't even his room. It was Clove's room. How had he gotten here? And where had Clove gone off to? The pain in his stomach had died down, but the air was chilly and unwelcoming. His teeth chattered briskly as he moved himself to under the blanket, drawing it up around him as he shook erratically. Once under the sheets, he felt a small prick, and grimaced, pulling the offending object out from under him. It was the teal bow he'd taken from Clove's sister. At the time, he'd felt compelled to have it. It had a significance he couldn't recall, and that had only made it more desirable in his eyes. He placed the bow on the table beside him and closed his eyes, trying to clear his mind, but failed. Clove's room held a terrible aura, one he couldn't exactly place. He knew he'd have to ask Clove how he had gotten there later. In the meantime, he disappeared from the world into the perils of slumber. Underscore 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 underscore. I'm guessing the annex had him on a steroid regimen. Steroids? Clove asked, furrowing her brows in confusion. Unlike anything back home, too. This stuff's manufactured directly in the capital. I don't understand. Felix appeared worn down, sleep-deprived, and they hadn't even made their way to the capital yet. It's not necessarily unusual. They tried to begin one with me last year, but I told them to go fuck themselves. The trainers didn't like that and made my candidacy work a lot more difficult, but I couldn't handle the idea of putting something I don't know about into my body. Aren't steroids a form of cheating? She asked. Training in general is cheating, Felix quipped. Clove slid against the wall and onto the floor, gazing up at him with gleaming eyes. Do you think he'd have won the tournament without them? Felix seemed unsure, almost guilty for saying as much. You know Kato. He grew up skinny, small. Not well fed and not well cared for either. Even when he got older, he still was of a more diminutive build than the rest of us right until 14. That's a pretty late start in life. Clove wasn't so sure any of that necessarily mattered, seeing as Felix had become a lot thinner since he'd won and she'd still bet her odds on him. The trainers were trying to even out the playing field, to compensate and make him a viable option, and to their credit, they did, but every action has a consequence. She looked up at him, like unwarranted aggression. I can't say, Felix replied. Kato's always been aggressive. Clove tightened her posture and thoughtfully remarked, not this aggressive. What did he do? Felix asked. When the brunette didn't respond, Felix read between the lines. His eyes lightened in severity, and an uncharacteristically gentle, but concerned expression came over his face. Tell me that's not a typical reaction, she snapped, blotting away angry tears. Felix put his hand on the top of her head and softly tousled her hair for a moment, before retracting a moment later. Steroid regimens are done in cycles. Best case scenario, they started it right about when I returned from tour. Worst case scenario, he's in the middle of it, and withdrawal will present its own set of challenges. How will we know, then? She looked to him. He exhaled a dramatic breath. Oh, we'll know, because Kato's either about to get a whole hell of a lot better or a lot fucking worse. Underscore 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 underscore. Clove was not happy. Infuriated, defensive, curious, and relentlessly paranoid. Yes. Happy. No. Felix had eyed her torn blouse with dark eyes, and then had pushed her into her temporary living chambers under the guise of getting ready. He did so without telling her that Kato was still occupying her bed. When she'd turned around and tried to leave, Felix had closed her in and told her that she and Kato needed to sort out their differences. At that point, Kato had woken up, and snorted derisively at the suggestion. She felt betrayed anger course through her. Felix had just thrown her into a room with someone who not even 12 hours ago had tried to rape her. Clove had used a select handful of vindictive words against the raven-haired teen, but was unable to pry the door open. She remained by the corner of the room, trying to mask her discomfort, but failing. So we have to sort out our differences, Kato stated. Clove didn't dignify his oh-so-wise observation with a response. Exasperated, he complained of her demeanor. You think I'm happy about this either, Clove? Like I'm dying to kill the one. He stopped, unable to finish his thought. Well, why not, she demanded, braver in daylight hours. Just fuck him and throw him away, right? What the hell are you talking about? Clove stomped over to Kato and gave him a spiteful look. You think you can scare me into blind obedience? Well, don't think for even a second that you or anything else can tell me what to do. I don't know, he said, vaguely sarcastically. I think you look pretty shaken up. She bared her teeth. I'm not going down without a fight. Kato rolled his eyes, bored. I'd be disappointed if you did. Pulling the sheets off of him, the teen slipped out of bed, and neared her. We've got a lot of ground to cover before then. Truce. He stuck out his arm. The brunette eyed him skeptically, on one condition. Is that so? He jeered. She yanked him down by the collar of his shirt, with a nasty expression on her face. If you ever try to repeat your stunt from last night ever again, you'll be the first one I gun for when the counter strikes 0. I will make this excruciating for you. Clove let go of his collar and gave him a sweet smile, before kicking the door so roughly that the individual on the other side fell to ground as she made her exit. The blonde frowned, crossing his arms. But what the hell did I do? Underscore 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 underscore. His prep team was obnoxious. They had long ago introduced themselves, but he couldn't for the life of him remember what their names were. The trio consisted of an older purple-skinned man with white hair and a white mustache, silver eyeliner, and blue eyes, as well as a young woman barely older than him, with sea-green hair, golden eyes, and small wings embedded into her back, and a pink-skinned middle-aged woman with black hair, black eyes, and tattoos outlined in simple, clean black ink. The youngest of them, the green-haired girl, was chatty, enthusiastic, and not subtle in her advances at all. They'd been tidying him up for about an hour and she'd already called him, amongst many other things, an Adonis and remarked upon his resemblance to the sculpture David. Kato could only imagine what Clove would say if she could hear the young woman. There was still a vague stinging pain from the complete waxwork they'd performed on him, and his head still ached considerably from the previous day. Your mentor, he's very, very handsome too. I asked Daddy to get him for my birthday last year, but Daddy said no. She pouted a bit. The blonde wasn't sure what she meant by that, but it made his skin itch uncomfortably. Her gold eyes flickered, and she gave him a seductive glance. She looked almost like a desert wildcat ready to feast upon its prey, and with her eyes, the resemblance was nearly uncanny. He sat in place as they tried to cover as many of his scars as they could. Every year your tributes are a mess, clucked the purple-skinned man, who seemed to be taking inventory. Kato wanted to scoff. He'd never be able to tally up the complete count. Harley, be nice. You remember what happened last year, the pink-skinned woman chastised. I do, the younger girl peeked, grinning at the purple-skinned man. Harley said nothing in return to both of the women, and continued to cover the marks as quickly as he could. Kato was silently impressed by their work, if not a bit uncomfortable. He hadn't looked this clear-skinned in over a decade. Besides, if this young man wins, they'll fix him up permanently when he returns, the pink-skinned woman told him. The sea-green-haired young woman squealed, oh, Kato, you must win then. Zaina, please get back to work, the pink-skinned woman ordered. She looked embarrassed. Oh, relax, Aries. Kato is a show winner. Aren't you? She asked him with a smile. He studied her for a moment. Everything about them was so bizarre. Almost as if they were from a twisted, delusional daydream of his. The blonde was pretty sure her hair wasn't a wig, which was particularly strange to him. Kato finally responded, you'll find no one better prepared. Aries and Harley said nothing in return, but Zaina clapped her hands cheerfully, of course we won't. She ran a hand through his hair, which he hadn't had time to wash since yesterday's reaping, before assessing him completely. Your eyes are lovely, but with some work we could make them even brighter. Once you return. Kato wondered if that was supposed to be incentive. He wasn't sure. Another hour went by as they washed his hair, tidied up his eyebrows, and rid him of any dirt. It was an uncomfortable process, but nothing comparable to what he'd gone through in training. It was a different sort of uncomfortable, really. Zaina's accent, one he'd only heard on television before, had become less peculiar, though he'd supposed that after hearing anything for 2 hours, his brain would have rationalized it as normal eventually. The last step was to oil him down, and he had to stifle a gasp as his skin became moist and soft to the touch. In District 2, dry skin was a presumption. The land was a nearly barren desert and youth in training didn't care to expose themselves to the coarse climate by walking around in smooth, vulnerable skin. Here, in the capital, he doubted such precautions were necessary and didn't fight them as he was sure so many others did. Zaina, go fetch Michaelis. Our tribute is ready. underscore 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 underscore. Clove kicked her knees together, a discomfort in the pit of her stomach as she waited for her stylist. Her prep team had removed every single stray hair on her body. They'd cleaned her hair, oiled her skin, and even worked to clean up her scars. Of course, this wasn't before they cooed at her with pity, asking if she worked in the quarries and if that was the reason she was so beat up. She'd felt like an examination subject, awaiting the first strike. As the door opened, Clove's eyes traveled to the woman who'd be her stylist. Her hair was styled in long, lilac curls, with unnaturally blue eyes. "I'm Flora." Clove didn't say anything, only watching her stylist hesitantly as the woman came over to assess her bare body. Up close, Clove could see that Flora was young for a District 2 stylist. Maybe around the same age as her aunt, about mid-30s. "You're the first to be reaped in several decades, but you don't look at all afraid." "I'd planned to volunteer for the Quell, anyways," Clove said, trying to appease her stylist's discerning eye. Flora looked mildly impressed. "Yes, well, you're a small thing, but a perfect companion to your district partner. You have the perfect bone structure for what we've decided on." "And what's that?" Clove asked noncommittally. She thought back to Felix's outfit the previous year. They'd covered him and Cinder in stone-colored spray paint to highlight their muscle tone, turning the pair into statuesque works of art. Flora only smirked, "An homage to our history, golden gladiators." Underscore 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 underscore. "They're not meant to compliment us," Cato said candidly, as they waited for their chariots. Michaelis and Flora had gone off to discuss other matters, and they stood impatiently as the chariot was brought forward. In the background, Athena and Felix watched them. Clove gave them a wary once-over. Gladiators were low-class, slaves. Volunteers were rare and only the subject of a last resort. In other words, these outfits demean our training. The blonde was much more well-read on such inane subjects, so she trusted his reasoning, but Clove couldn't hide that she thought the costumes were incredibly well-designed despite their covert meaning. "At least we're not quarry workers. My prep team thinks I look like the statue of David." "My prep team doesn't think at all." He smirked at that. "Nervous?" Bored, Clove corrected. Cato arched his brows. "Not for long." The pair was led into the chariot by Flora and Michaelis, who positioned them side by side. Cato to the left, and Clove to the right. They rested immediately behind District 1, whose horses were of a sleek, white coat that matched the luxury district's white tunics and toxic silver spray paint. They might have been considered attractive to the District 2 duo if the scent of their spray paint wasn't too busy suffocating them. No wonder Amethyst agreed to kill Fix. "I would have to with how putrid that stuff smells," Clove complained. The opening music began and the doors opened. Swiftly, the horses began leading the chariot into the streets. Crowds lined the streets, screaming their district numbers as they passed. Lately, his name had been cheered so many times, that Cato's tolerance had begun to outweigh his distinct distaste for loud noises. Clove began to slide against him, a subtle clink of her armor making impact with his, and he steadied her slightly. They waved at the crowd with long, winning strides, not nearly as quickly as the pair in front on them. As the last chariot made its way into the streets, unfamiliar names were screeched with such enthusiasm that Clove blinked, almost losing her cool mask. She looked up towards the nearest screen to see that the last tributes, from the trudges of 12, were on fire. At first, she wondered if the flames would overtake them and they'd have to be replaced, but they were dark, illuminated only by the flames that surrounded them. In no time at all of the attention had been usurped from her and Cato, and the crowd began to cheer for District 12 by name, Katniss. "Peter." A fierce anger boiled in Cato's chest, and as the tributes began blowing kisses towards the Capitol crowd, the cameras began singularly focusing in on them. Within a few minutes, their chariot stopped in the center of City Circle, outside of the president's extravagant home. The capital anthem began to play as he bid them welcome and made a concise speech. Shortly afterwards, the chariot began to move once more and Cato and Clove were pulled directly into the training center. Here, they would excel. Here, they'd show 12 what a mistake it had been to cross them. Once inside, the prep team ran to their side and the stylists removed them from the chariot. For now, we've done what we can. The rest is up to you. It sounded faintly like an apology, but Cato didn't give them even a flicker of attention. Instead, he waited furiously. As District 12 pulled in, he gave them a sadistic, malicious glare. The boy turned away, looking highly uncomfortable. Cato licked his lips delectably. He would take great pleasure in breaking them. Piece by piece, bone by bone. If attention was what they wanted, he'd be sure to fulfill their wishes. He'd immortalize their suffering and make them unforgettable even in death. Underscore 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 underscore